What's up, everybody? How's it going? It's another Tuesday, and so it's time to get a little tactical. Today, we've got a lot of interesting things to talk about. Obviously, the new Dataslate changes went live last Thursday, and I've talked about them on the channel extensively, but this weekend was the first opportunity for people to see those in action. It's very exciting. I played with them myself, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit. So I went to an RTT. They implemented the new Dataslate changes, so I'll go through my games there. I thought they were really interesting, and we can talk about kind of the first impressions of this wildly rebalanced Warhammer 40k in action. How's it going, everybody in chat? Chris Bardsley used a Harridan list on the weekend, got a win? Dude. Yeah, the list is sick. I'm super happy with the Harridan list. Not anymore, though, obviously. I think this weekend was... While last weekend was supposed to be the last flight of Harridan, I think this weekend is probably realistically the last one, because this was the release, the actual final street release of the updated Tyranid Codex. But I'll still be talking about previous version of the Harridan list because that's what I played and that's what I was allowed to play. But we'll talk about it mostly in context of discussing the Dataslate updates. But congratulations, Chris, on taking out a win with the Harridan list. I was pretty happy with it. Aaron, come here for unbiased hot takes. Are Nids really going to be all kinds of stupid? Yeah, I think so. There are some... I think there's a little bit of egg on my face. I said on a stream weeks and weeks ago, and I made a little short about it that's on the channel still, that if the new Tyranid Codex will probably get toned down from what it had in 8th edition, your stuff will get stronger, but you'll lose a lot of the movement tricks that Tyranids had. And in exchange, you'll probably lose access to Crusher Stampede, High Fleet Leviathan. Which is going to be a big blow to the flexibility of the Codex. I did not anticipate stratagems like Encircle the Prey being printed, so egg on my face. I think that if any events allow Tyranids to retain use of Crusher Stampede and Encircle the Prey, Tyranids are head and shoulders above every other faction in the game. Excuse me, not Encircle, the Leviathan supplement, Crusher and Leviathan. Encircle the Prey also probably still could get banned. I don't know. I think the faction would be okay. Even if they don't allow those supplements, the faction is still probably the best in the game. And while there are some problems with the Codex mechanically that do downgrade its power level, the first one being that essentially until we get an Imperial Armor Compendium update, basically all of the Forge World options for Tyranids are non-playable because the keywords have changed. My hope is that we see an Imperial Armor update shortly that also includes updates for Eldari, who over the weekend I was reminded still not gotten an Imperial Armor update to their Forge World units, which means a lot of their Forge World units use mechanics that are not compatible with the current version of the Eldar Codex. But I also hope that we see some changes to the Forge World units to not only give them the Tyranid keywords, but also, potentially bring them a little bit more in line with the current version of Tyranid mechanics. I'd like to see, with the loss of Crusher Stampede, some of these data sheets get updated a little bit. Harridan being one of them. I think Hieroduals as well are right on the verge of being playable, but if you push them a little bit, they're going to become a lot better. That said, who knows? We're probably not going to see that. Zone Thropes right now are a problem for the game, for the Codex, because they are kind of integral to how the Codex plays, at least in kind of non-psychic focused builds, which is a little bit weird sounding, but because they theoretically are supposed to give you access to their Synaptic Imperative to keep whatever doesn't have Warp Shielding or Dermic Symbiosis alive on turn 1 or 2. That's it's a big deal. So if you're trying to play Carnifexes, if you're trying to play Exocrines, if you're trying to play any of these big stompy monsters who have to deploy on the line and run up at your opponent, giving them a 4+ invulnerable save for 1 turn is a very big deal. Right now, currently, Zone Thropes do not have a Synaptic Imperative because they don't have the Synapse keyword. So there are some problems with the Tyranid Codex, and I hope they get updated. Even without those, though, and assuming that we don't get access to the supplements, which I believe every major event that is allowing Tyranids currently is disallowing those supplements, as they should, then I think Tyranids are still going to be super duper strong. So, yeah. Chris Dyer, 6 games in with the new codex, no use of supplements, still 6 wins, one close game against Tau prior to the balanced data slate. Yeah, it does not need the supplements, it turns out. 100% agreed. And interestingly, yeah, Tau, I think, was... and I talked about this when we discussed Tyranid GT lists from the Fabricators Forge event last weekend, that I think Data Slate rebalance, Tau was a super interesting matchup for Tyranids, because the Tau would come out swinging, they would, get their Monka bonuses, they would use their maneuverability, they would take a lot of table space, and then as their damage output shrunk, the Tyranid army would take more and more table space back from them. So it was about the Tau player getting as big a lead as they could as early as possible, because they were always going to lose the late game against Tyranids. And I think that's it was a super cool dynamic, and every time I played the matchup, it felt very close, it felt very even. With these new changes to Tau, though, I don't know how well that matchup is going to go. And I have a sneaking suspicion that they're going to be kind of forced into relying more on Farside Enclave style lists that take less of the big, heavy, long-range guns that often relied on broadsides and indirect fire, but two things that got nerfed. And I think those style of lists are going to be way less effective against Tyranids, because the Farside Enclaves list, by definition, essentially has to engage with you right in the range that Tyranids want to be fighting with your opponent. And if you commit into a Tyranid army, they are going to kill you. I don't think anything in the game survives fighting a Tyranid army head on. You have to play more of a game plan around the edges, essentially. Lorenzo, when last Imperial Armor Compendium came out, GW told that they would not keep the datasheets updated. That's not the case, though. Every codex that has been released has had transformative changes to the core mechanics has had Imperial Armor Compendium updates alongside it. So I think that they will do that. Why should supplements not be allowed? Haven't seen anything official banning them. Because they're broken. That's why. There you go. That's all you need. Because they were designed for a codex that had dramatically less powerful datasheets. I think the reason given is that is that some of the rules reference the 8th edition codex, I think, as people in the chat are pointing out, and now that those rules would be either redirected or not work correctly with the new codex. That's nominally the reason, but the real reason is that the Tyranid codex is ridiculously strong, and if you add Crusher Stampede on top of it, it is unbeatably disgusting. So I think that's how it goes. How do I reckon it's playing into Thousand Suns since the data slate? I think you just Mortal Wound them into Oblivion is going to be the game plan, generally speaking. Now, obviously, Thousand Suns is a little bit tougher to Mortal Wound because they have a lot of denies across their whole army, so they can potentially deny a lot of you, but every time you kill a Scarab Terminator, it's a big deal. Is that why Specialist Detachments were banned? Specialist Detachments were banned in a GT release, and I don't know if Specialist Detachments were ever broken, but they were sort of, at the time, they were slowly being phased out as codexes would get updated and lose compatibility with those specialist attachments, but they were also kind of inconsistently applied across the game. Some factions had very powerful specialist attachments. Some armies had very terrible specialist attachments. Some armies, like this one, had no specialist attachments, and it was very sad. And I think especially moving forward as the game develops, keeping those specialist attachments updated, especially since the books they were printed in were going out of print, would have been an absolute fucking nightmare. So if you're not playing a GT game, you can still play specialist attachments, but specialist attachments are full-on turned off in GT. I don't think we see the same thing in GT games for Armies of Renown, or at least not yet. We may see it in the future for Armies of Renown, or supplemental materials. The open question, and the reason it's been a question, I mean, I think the commands are still active in the chat. If you want to put in exclamation point Leviathan, exclamation point Crusher. The reason that it's been such a question in the lead up to this codex release is that this is, outside of one example out of Adeptus Mechanicus, this is the first time that a supplemental material has been released in such close proximity to a new codex. So, I mean, Highfleet Leviathan came out October, so 6 months ago, and Crusher Stampede was in December, so 4 months ago. And you know, now 4 months down the road, we have a brand new codex with an entire new set of rules, and this isn't really a situation with precedent outside of Crusher Stampede. That's the biggest piece of evidence people would put forward to keep Crusher Stampede, is because there were releases for, or at least to keep Leviathan, there were releases for Adeptus Mechanicus in the past that were 1 month prior to their codex release, I believe. But I think those changes were a lot less transformative to the faction. All right. So yeah, so that's specialist detachments specifically. Armies of Renown are still allowed. Armies of Renown are allowed for GT. But so far, we haven't had an Army of Renown released before the release of the faction, the codex it was supposed to be used alongside, which is the reason that Crusher Stampede is weird. And especially since there are functional reprints to stratagems between Crusher Stampede and the Tyranid Codex. Anyway, we've talked about this issue for decades, and I think I'll probably do a video on it just to have a sort of concrete, but my thoughts on it put into a concrete place that I can point people towards. I might do that later this week if it's not addressed in a more official capacity by the end of the week, which I would hope would happen, and especially since there are typos and misprints in the Tyranid Codex. I mean, come on, G-Dub, let's just like do a little FAQ, you know, on Thursday or whatever, that like fixes Zoanthropes and fixes like Encircle and says you can't use Crusher Stampede. Let's just nip this in the bud so we can stop talking about it. But anyway, let's talk about the new Dataslate update, and let's talk about this event that I played in. So this was just a 3-round RTT, but it was relatively big. I think we had 16 or 17 people at the event, which is pretty good, and a lot of people very excited about the new Dataslate update. And what was interesting was that there were a lot of people who were bringing factions that had been hit by the Dataslate update, basically to see how they would do. So not only did we see factions that had been buffed, there were a lot of Death Guard players there were a lot of Space Marine players there, but we also saw a lot of nerfed factions. So there was several Tau players, there was a Harlequins player, there were a lot of people playing factions that had, there were a lot of Adeptus Custodes players, a lot of factions that had been toned down were also showing up to the event just to give a try to the new rules and see how they went, which is super cool. I played Tyranids. While they did allow the new data slate to be used, they didn't let me use the new codex, which is very sad. So like I said before, last week was supposed to be the last flight of Harry Dan, but he got one more. The ruling came through, and he got another lease on life. He was given parole for another week and allowed to be played with at full power before he gets depowered by the release of the updated codex. So I played the exact same list that I played at my RTT last week. Exclamation point list in the chat if you want to take a look at it. It's also should be in the video description, I believe. But it is a Crusher Stampede list. I fought for a long time with myself on how to fit Harry Dane into Crusher Stampede. This is my favorite version so far, and I think it's probably the sort of the ultimate version. It's a single patrol detachment alongside the Harridan himself. It's got 2 units of Tyranid Warriors with bioweapon bonds. It has the Swarmlord and a Neurothrope. Swarmlord is there to caddy the Mass Convergence powers and give double move to some of the bigger monsters. The Neurothrope is mostly there to cast Psychic Interrogation and to give me an Onslaught bot if I need to. We also basically need a third character to carry Catalyst around to put on the Harridan, and so that's a Maleceptor in this list. The Maleceptor also, there's a little bit of synergy because he can Encephalic Diffuse on the Hyrule and the Harridan on turn 1, so he gives you a little bit of safety there if you're up against big gun lines. Generally speaking, if your opponent has the guff to kill a Harridan before your shields go up, you're going to strategic reserve him into Deep Strike because the Neurothrope has strategic adaptation as well as Swarm Leader, so he's going to be giving rerolls to the Hive Guard, which is pretty important since the Hive Guard were going to be oftentimes suffering -1 to hit, or -1 ballistic kill, I should say, because they were going to be shooting indirect fire, which is a big deal for that unit. whether it kind of puts the updated version of Impaler Cannons even deeper into the hole, being minus one ballistic skill with no rerolls and no access to consistent rerolls, and with shorter range is pretty brutal for those guys. So RIP updated Tyranid Hive Guard. I think they went from being like, maybe with a buff fringe playable to being probably never see them, which is unfortunate. We also had, rounding out the remainder of the list, we had a Moloch. He was previously a Harpy that would follow the Tyranids around and sit on objectives for him, but I turned into a Moloch mostly because this list is very bad at scoring table objectives, so things like Stranglehold, or even sometimes scoring primary points, because a third of your army is in a unit that can't score objectives. So the Moloch is mostly in there to give me an extra objective holder and to score engage in all fronts sometimes, which is you're oftentimes going to be doing. You can get your own 2 table quarters pretty easily with the warriors and the monsters, and then the Harridan will get you a 3rd table quarter, and if the Moloch has a good drop, you can drop the Moloch in a 4th table quarter, and you can get all 3 points for the table quarters. Skywolf in the UK, Zoanthropes 100% have the keyword. They don't have the keyword. They have the Synapse ability, but because Synaptic Imperatives require the bolded keyword, they have to have it in the keyword section of their datasheet, which they don't. Harry Dan is heading back to the big hive farm in the sky. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a big termite mound in the sky that Harry Dan's going to go sit on top of for a while. Anyway, we'll talk about my games. So it's the same list I played last week. I was pretty happy with it. The only functional change to it in the Dataslate update was that change to Impaler Cannons that I just mentioned, which was a pretty big deal, but meant that you have to play a little bit more aggressively with the Hive Guard, which I actually kind of liked. It forces you to rethink how you play them, which was pretty cool. Round 1, I was up against Blood Angels. Here they are. And this game was pretty interesting. So, obviously playing against the newly buffed Adeptus Astartes. So everyone has Armor of Contempt built in. They reduce incoming armor penetration by 1 unless they have a Storm Shield. And for that reason, my opponent played Blood Angels and focused very heavily on Sanguinary Guard, which have a base 2+ save, but do not rely on a Storm Shield for that. So they're effectively, against enemies that have, or against any enemy, I guess, they effectively have a 1+ armor save, because obviously AP 0 weapons are still going to be saving on 2, so it doesn't matter, and AP 1 weapons are going to be reduced. Any other AP above 0 is going to be reduced by 1. If they're in cover on top of that, that gives them a 0+ save, which means that the fact that they don't have an invulnerable save doesn't matter too much, because oftentimes they're going to have a pretty solid armor save against whatever is coming into them. So my opponent was playing 2 big bricks of Sanguinary Guard. He did have a big brick of Vanguard veterans, but limited the number of Storm Shields in there. So there were 10 Vanguard veterans, only 3 Storm Shields, I believe, and the rest of the models in the unit had 2 melee weapons, either Thunderhammer and a Lightning Claw, 2 Lightning Claws, or a Chainsword and a Lightning Claw, which allows you to shave some points off that unit, which is very nice, but also means that their damage output is also increased. So while Vanguard veterans got easier to kill, they no longer have to worry quite as much about indirect fire, because not only is most indirect fire relatively low AP outside of things like, I guess, like D cannons, but they're also going to be adding an additional +1 to their save if the indirect fire does not have line of sight to them, and they're going to be reducing AP by 1. So even a regular Space Marine who's standing behind a wall is going to be taking a 3+ armor save against the Hive Guard shooting at him, which is pretty nuts when you think about it. So this Hive Guard went from plowing it more impactfully affected 2 AP indirect fire weapons. So going forward, not only Hive Guard, because you're not going to play Hive Guard realistically, but it also affects things like Shadow Weavers and Night Spinners, who were, I should say, very popular in Eldar lists, because those are also AP2, multi-damage in the case of the Night Spinner, and they would put those, especially if they were in conjunction with Masterful Shots to ignore cover, they would put those Vanguard veterans or regular Power Armored Space Marines on a 5+ save. Now you're +2 to your save against that, so they're saving on 3s, which means that those things they'll kill like 1 dude maybe, and then you're not that worried about it. So the fact that those Vanguard veterans did not have Storm Shields was not quite as big of a deal as it originally looked like it was. My opponent from there, he had 2 units of Incursors, a unit of Assault Intercessors to hold his backline objectives, 1 big unit of Death Company to threaten that Forlorn Fury on turn 1, and as well as a Master of Sanctity on a bike. Dante making an appearance, an Apothecary, or a Sanguinary Priest, I should say, as well as a Sanguinary Ancient as well, to get that fight on Death Banner. So I think there's also a Whirlwind, not pictured in this photo. I think he was hiding in the back somewhere. But the Whirlwind also being affected by that -1 ballistic skill was a pretty big deal for that guy because he doesn't have any good rerolls. And it's mostly there for the suppression fire stratagem, which forces a fight last and no overwatch effect on something as long as you can score a hit on them. And one thing that we realized very quickly was, especially on boards with a large amount of dense cover like this one had, we can see we had a lot of forest in the middle here, and there were a lot of times that Whirlwind would be shooting through dense cover at something it couldn't see, which means it was -1 ballistic skill and -1 to hit, so it was hitting on 5s. And if it got a low roll on its number of attacks, it would have a pretty reasonable chance of missing, which meant suppression fire was significantly less reliable than I think you'd be expecting from the past. So we were really on both sides, coming and going, getting kind of hammered by the indirect fire changes. And let me tell you, especially for my opponent, I could feel the efficiency of my units like just bleeding away as we started to take into effect these indirect fire changes and Armor of Contempt. And it didn't feel bad. I won't lie, because previously, you would see a Space Marine army like this, and a unit of Hive Guard would just double tap and pick up almost an entire Sanguinary Guard unit. And the matchup was basically, it was like, you might as well not even play. Because, you'd be sitting in the back, the Harridan would shoot and kill a unit, the Hive Guard would shoot and kill a unit, you'd spend a couple CP, and then your army would just sit there, and your opponent would run at you, and then you'd kill 2 more units, and then there would be mostly out of units. And this game did not quite go that well. Now, my opponent did have the Forlorn Fury bomb with the big unit of 10 Death Company, so the first turn was going to be a big deal, because what they could do, they actually ended up deploying all the Death Company on the line right here. And obviously with Forlorn Fury, they could just run basically to the midline of the table. They had the Angel's Artifice, is that what it's called? The banner on the Ancient for +2 movement. And they could run that guy up to the Death Company unit, and the Death Company could move 14 and then charge and then blow up a bunch of stuff. Eat a lot of attacks coming back at them, take a lot of the pressure off the remainder of the Blood Angels unit, and just buy a lot of table space. So the first turn was going to be a huge deal, simply because of the inclusion of that Death Guard unit, or that Death Company, the Death Guard unit now. So I ended up winning the roll to go first, though, which is obviously a pretty important thing for a matchup like this one. I misplayed a little bit. I used my redeploy to put the Harridan at the front of the table. For some reason, I didn't take a picture of the board state at the start of turn 1, so this is actually top of 2. And I just used the Harridan to move directly forward with the intention of hitting the Incursor unit that was right here. Unfortunately, I failed my charge on them. Even with a reroll. And so the Harridan just stood there like an idiot and looked really dumb. The plan was to, I got 2 smites into them, which is why they're missing a couple models. I figured, Mr. Harridan, we're going to give you some extra attacks. I have, with Aggressive Surge, I have a pretty reasonable expectation that you can kill 3 Space Marines. So let's get it done, buddy. Just blow those guys up. Obviously, this is a little bit of a dangerous proposition because, again, that Armor of Contempt means that the Harridan, only being AP 3, is reduced to AP 2, and again, those guys are saving on 5s. So if I put, let's say I have a bonus attacks, I'm probably full rerolling. If I put like 6-ish wounds into them, they save, 3 out of the first 5 or whatever, they could potentially be CP rerolling a 5-up save into saving the unit and forcing me to not trigger my overrun, which means I'm sitting in front of an entire unit of Vanguard veterans and Sanguinary Guard and feeling pretty bad about myself. So in hindsight, not only was this required a little bit tougher of a charge roll than I expected, but also because of that Armor of Contempt, it makes killing these Space Marine units so much less consistent that creating game plans that bank on killing them is just it's not a good way to play. Try to kill them in other ways. Don't try to kill them with like AP2, AP3 weapons and hope that'll be okay, because sometimes they just roll 5-ups and you do nothing. It's significantly more difficult to kill Space Marine units now. So I ended up failing my charge with Harridan. I felt really stupid. I did shoot the Hive Guard into the Vanguard Veterans. I killed, I believe, 2. Did not elect to double tap or anything like that. The Bioweapon Bond and rerolls from the Swarm Leader definitely helped getting around the -1 to hit. But one of those guys just got resurrected by the Sanguinary Priest. However, while on his way up, Harridan did just take a shot at the Death Company unit that I had said was deployed right here, and actually just wiped the entire unit out. So that was pretty good for me. I was surprised that my opponent didn't use the Forlorn Fury to shuffle them into a more defensive position. So they could go, for example, into the corner of this building here from where they were, and then the Harridan, having been placed, because I do as a first player, I do my pre-battle effects first. The Harridan, having been placed here, would have had to fly all the way over here, which means it's not in hover mode, to attack them. So if I attack them, he can then counterattack with Sanguinary Guard and characters and whatever he has. So, not to mention there that I'm either pushing aggressive, probably too aggressively forward with the Harridan. I also am, if I don't do that, I'm not getting engaged in all fronts that turn 1. So, not sure I entirely agreed with that decision there to essentially leave the Death Company to their fate. I think I would have pregame moved them and at least forced me to think about my turn 1 move a little bit more differently. Anyway, I didn't end up getting punished by the Harridan. He was just sitting over here. I think he was over the line, so we were getting engaged in all fronts. But he was just sitting here like a big idiot. My opponent elected not to push forward. He had a Sanguinary Guard unit behind this building, which the charge for which would have been pretty long. I think he was actually, the Harridan was on this side of the wall. So I think the charge would have been pretty long to get a Sanguinary Guard unit in there. He could have thrown the Vanguard Veterans in, but didn't have all the buffs on them. And at that point, just gets eviscerated by this Hive Guard unit. So I think his game plan was to focus on things that weren't the Harridan and try to kill those things, and just hope that the damage from the Harridan didn't end up crippling his army. So I had moved up to the objective right here in order to hold it with the Hierodule. This is where my opponent used the suppression fire interaction that we talked about earlier. This is round 2, obviously. My opponent mostly just sent up, he set up a unit of Sanguinary Guard behind this wall, set up another unit here, hid everything behind this wall, and basically, baited me to come forward and fight him. I ended up not doing that. I just pulled Harridan back so that he wasn't in charge range of all that stuff and would get another turn of shooting. I actually basically did nothing this turn because, again, that Armor of Contempt's really showing its power here. My opponent had a bunch of units towing the Ruin here to get cover, or a bunch of models towing the Ruin to get cover, and made an absolutely ludicrous string of 3+ armor saves. I think between the Harridan and the Hive Guard, I only single tapped the Hive Guard. I ended up, I don't think I double tapped them once this tournament because their indirect fire was that much less effective. I ended up shooting the Harridan and the Hive Guard in order to ignore the penalty to hit from not being able to see my target into the Sanguinary Guard, who had a couple models in hiding in the terrain, which meant that those models were saving on 3s against the Harridan gun. And I think I killed 1 Sanguinary Guard out of, and I had forced, I want to say 21 saves. I think the Harridan converted 13, which is about average, and the Hive Guard converted 8, which is still strong. And my opponent made 13. 13 3+ armor saves against them. Or 19, or is that right? 13, 19, 20? 20 out of 21? Is I believe what happened? Maybe I killed 2. I think it was 19 out of 21 he made in 3+ armor saves. So again, I was like, oh, this Armor of Contempt really killed me right now. I hope that's a recoverable amount of damage because my opponent had all this stuff on this side. I was hoping to be able to basically neutralize one of these Sanguinary Guard squads, then be able to focus on the stuff coming in here, and then when my opponent elects to move the Vanguard Veterans out, I have a turn to shoot at them with the Hive Guard. But instead, I did nothing for the entire turn, and I was feeling pretty bad. So my opponent did get in with this big unit of Sanguinary Guard in onto the Hierodule. He used that suppressing fire to stop me from being able to overwatch the Flamer, which is very effective, and make me fight last, so I couldn't interrupt. Unfortunately, I did have the Synaptic Barrier on that guy, and my dice were also pretty okay. We called this the Cursed Objective because basically no one could kill each other on this objective. Everything went in, put the Hierodule down to 5 or 6 wounds. The Hyrule attacked into, I believe, the Chaplain and only converted a single attack into him. So he took a little bit of damage, but wasn't dead. He did have the Iron Resolve for a 5+ damage ignore, so he saved a bunch of those. But I was hoping I could peel him out with Mortal Wounds on the subsequent turn. So moving on, the game kind of toilet bowled around this fight for a while. Swarmlord double moved himself around and went into the Chaplain. The Harridan jumped over and then breaking through to kill 3 Sanguinary Guard. Because the Chaplain had the 5-up damage ignore, I didn't want to breaking through into him because there was a pretty good chance that he would save out of it. But killing the Sanguinary Guard was a big deal. So the breaking through just like 1 CP kill 3 guys is very good, especially since, like we just talked about, all my weapons over here are AP3, and with Armor of Contempt, the Sanguinary Guard are saving on 4s, which means that not only do I have to get through a -1 to hit effect from their death masks, and then also wound, which is pretty easy to be fair, but then they have a 50-50 chance of saving out of it, which means like I hit on 4s, and then they save on 4s, and I wound on 2s, so I'm probably only converting like 15% of my attacks. So like a Hyrule should attack them 6 times and kill 1 guy maybe, which doesn't feel very good. The Harridan breaking through into this unit, the Swarmlord was able to kill the Chaplain, thank goodness, and we moved on. The Hyrule eventually went down. Swarmlord got stuck into a fight with the remainder of this unit, and effectively basically just blanked all of the characters. The characters had ended up making the migration over and then moving in to try to finish off Swarmlord. Swarmlord was down to about 5 wounds, and he took Dante and the Sanguinary Ancient to the face after killing the Chaplain, and took like 2 damage because he just made his 3+ in bones. And I was very proud of him. It was like, good job, Swarmlord. Harridan basically, because he's both Titanic and he has his fallback ability and is an aircraft, was able to just move out, charge back in, and continue to break through to eventually kill the Sanguinary Guard. Although he didn't kill many with his attacks, but he also used his ranged attacks to clear out a bunch of the models over here holding objectives. My opponent moved the Vanguard veterans over to objective 2. And again, they cleared out the warriors that were holding the objective and body blocking any forward momentum there. But I knew there was going to be a turn where those guys would have to expose themselves, and they did, and the Hive Guard shot them with no modifiers this time, not suffering that -1 to hit shooting over walls, and were able to just plow the unit for a bunch of damage. The Maleceptor hilariously then got engaged with them and just kept them in melee for a while because he's very difficult to kill. So they pounded on his 4+ invulnerable save for a bit. He smited them to death, and he actually killed 2 of them in melee somehow with his 3 attacks. I was very proud of him. He did great. But the Swarmlord and the Hyrule did go down on the other side. The Moloch had ended up being popped up, and I think I had removed it before I took this picture for some reason. But the Moloch had popped up after I killed a bunch of the, what do you call them? The objective secured models on this objective, so he was able to steal it and then run around and engage the Whirlwind in the back for a while. But mostly just in there taking backline objectives and scoring engaged all fronts. A lot of the fight was a fight over this objective right here, and that ended up giving me not a super duper high scoring victory. Let me grab my results real quick, but I believe it was 80s to 60s. Yeah, that was 90 points to 63 points, so still relatively close. And as I've talked about many times, we can obviously see the additional resilience for the entire Space Marine army from that Army of Contempt. There were a lot of situations where like my regular attacks just weren't going through, and honestly, the mortal wounds I did over the course of the game were dramatically more impactful than my actually attacking them, especially in melee. So in situations where you don't have that same access to mortal wounds, it's going to be a lot tougher to kill these Space Marine armies. Not to mention going first is a big deal in this matchup, just because, we both have super strong alpha strikes. My opponent can charge me with a bunch of Death Company. I can shoot him with the Harridan. Either one of those is going to wipe a unit out, basically, and give you a lot of board control. And that's what ended up happening. So, pretty excited about that. I think the most interesting part about this matchup for me was that the Hive Guard were getting, because my opponent had less ranged attacks, my Hive Guard could play sort of aggressively, right? This is a very aggressive position for these Hive Guard. And that's just to get line of sight for their guns. And I think as a direct fire shooting platform, the unit isn't too bad. They're not great, but they're not, they're not terrible. So moving them out in line of sight when my opponent doesn't have a ton of stuff to shoot back at them didn't feel as bad. Whereas previously, because it was never necessary, there's just no reason to expose your indirect fire. You keep them outside of 1 inch of a wall, so they can't be engaged through the wall. You make your opponent come around. You make little bunkers for them so that you can't get like engaged by piling consolidation moves. And instead, I just basically put them almost at the front of my deployment zone and said go. And that ended up working out. Now, specifically, that was because of the matchup, in my opinion, because my opponent basically only had the Whirlwind, which already doesn't care about line of sight, and otherwise didn't have a lot of stuff to threaten them. But it did allow me to, it did force me to play that aggressively and not hide them in the back. All right. Let's do it. Templar Centurion's hard to kill now. -1 AP, -1 damage, mini transhuman. Yeah, the Stalwart effect, 2+5 up, 6 up ignore, 5 up is mortal. And you can give him a 5 with Litany of Divine Protection. You can give him a 5 up against regular damage too, right? Yeah, that's that unit. Pretty amazing. Dude, if we say Centurions back on the table, if this update puts Centurions back into the realm of playability, I think we can conclude that it was a pretty good update, right? Crazy. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. All right. So that was game 1. We're going in 1-0, and round 2 against another army that was very impacted by the Dataslate. This was against Death Guard, and I was actually really interested to play against Death Guard, because I think Death Guard, out of all of the factions, have low-key kind of gotten the biggest glow-up. And we're already starting to see some results from Death Guard armies doing well in the metagame. So not only did the entire Death Guard army get Armor of Contempt, which stacks on top of their damage reduction that they already have, and the fact that their defensive profiles were already pretty good. There's a lot of toughness 8 in the faction. There's a lot of 4+ invulnerable saves in the faction, especially on their Terminators, which, speaking of which, got objective secured, which is a pretty big deal. So I think while I don't know if you play Blightlord Terminators quite as aggressively as you would Death Shrouds, the armies that were already playing Death Shrouds are just going to be that much better. And I think there's certainly an argument to be made to play more Death Shroud Terminators. 3 units of 3 was already kind of the mainstay for a lot of Death Guard armies, and moving forward, I would not be shocked to see 3 units of 5 or more in Death Guard armies. Just because of the fact that not only are they resilient, even more resilient than they were already pretty difficult to kill. They're hard to engage into. They're very, they have good Overwatch because they have Flamer pistols. They have the Foul Blight Spawn protecting them. They're just this immovable object on the table, essentially. And on top of that, they have objective secured, which is always their downside. They would usually be relying on Poxwalkers, which recently got or not quite so recently, but but in the last MFM update, got a points increase. And now they don't need Poxwalkers to give them that objective secured anymore. They just sit on objectives themselves, which seems incredible. So I was interested to see how Death Guard ended up playing out. My opponent had an absolutely gorgeous Death Guard army. Let's see if I can find some better, closer pictures. He had this Demon Prince here, who is a kit bash of about 100 different models. Not all of which I could effectively identify, but he had these very nice desert bases. He had this gorgeous conversion, and I was pretty happy to play against this Death Guard army because it was very cool. So what my opponent had was it was kind of a Death Guard army out of like a Games Workshop, like a Warhammer community article or something. It had a big brick of Blightlord Terminators. It had a bunch of the characters, a Malignant Plaguecaster, a Lord of Contagion, a Tallyman, the Demon Prince that we talked about before. The Lord of Contagion was upgraded to the 9s with the defensive upgrades. And, as well as, he had 1 unit of Death Shroud Terminators, a big unit of 5, 2 Mephitic Blight Haulers, and then a bunch of Plague Marines in transports. I think there were 3 units of Plague Marines, one of them in a Rhino, as well as a Foul Blight Spawn. So it was kind of all over the place, the list. he had the big Blightlord Terminator wombo combo, but he wasn't fully committed on doing damage with the Blightlord Terminators. So you can, for example, stack just a litany of stratagems and abilities on Blightlord Terminators to try to make their guns do additional damage. So you can, for example, use the stratagem to count them as plague weapons, then with an Arch Contaminator, give them full rerolls to wound. You can give them rerolls to hit, either with a Lord, just giving them reroll 1s, and a +1 to hit from the Tallyman, so they're hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, or you have Mortarion to give them full rerolls. On top of that, you can have Tollkeeper to give them exploding 6s, so you can have this unit of Blightlord Terminators just poop out a billion. a billion pretty high impact bolter shots with full rerolls, essentially. And that's usually the use case I see for Blightlord Terminators, because it's a unique thing in the Death Guard Codex. It's not necessarily like, game-endingly good, but it is it's different than what Death Shroud Terminators did. But what my opponent had he had a smattering of ranged weapons, but he also had 2 Plague Fails in there. So they were a little bit more melee kitted than you typically see the unit. Now, my opponent had taken 2 the last, which hit both the Terminator bricks and the Blight Hauler unit. So I basically set up to try to alpha out that Blight Hauler unit. And I figured that if I was able to do that, there was very little that threatened the Harridan. So I could just kind of play in the Sprinkler for the rest of the game. Fortunately for me, we had this really interesting setup. These giant buildings were a little bit problematic. They actually they ruled that the base on the outside here had unstable positions. You couldn't stand on it, which is a little funky. You had to basically move all the way through, and you had to clamber. If you weren't breaching through the entire building, you had to clamber up on top of it, which meant that if you were standing on top of the building, it was almost impossible to engage you with melee, which is a little funky, but whatever. Because my opponent started deploying in this very concentrated brick and basically put his entire army out of line of sight, which in my opinion, I think was a mistake, because his army is so slow and my army is so fast that I can really take advantage of that. So he bricked everything up, and I was able to kind of just put my models wherever I wanted to. So I had a unit of Turret Warriors in the back to support the Harridan over on the left-hand side, all the big Brazilian monsters in the front. Again, my opponent's only long-range shooting was the Blight Haulers, really, and he had hidden the Blight Haulers so far away that I wasn't really worried about being shot by them, because they would take them 2 turns to cross around the buildings to actually get attacks into my my main lines here. And then I just had my opponent had a reasonable number of reserves. He had a unit of Plague Marines in reserve, as well as the Death Shroud Terminators in Deep Strike. And so I had some Warriors chained out on the sides to screen them out. Now, fortunately for me, again, I ended up going first. So it is what it is. Going first with aircraft is pretty good. And the Harridan flew over, got all the buffs, and ripped both of the Mephitic Blight Haulers off the table. So that was 1-2 the last dealt with immediately, and my opponent was pretty surprised by that. I was like, yeah, he's a 700-point guy. He kills 300-point save models pretty easily. The rest of my army mostly just moved up and started scoring. We were in Abandoned Sanctuaries this game, so I started scoring the bonus point for holding the center of the table. Now, another fortunate thing for me is that my opponent was so defensively placed here, so defensively positioned, that he didn't really have any way to threaten the middle this early, so I could just kind of stand there with my guys and chill out for a bit. He did a little bit of damage to the Hyrule with shooting, mostly ignored the Harridan, and I think as most players who play against the Harridan list will agree, especially in the Crusher Stampede version, he's so hard to kill that you just kill everything that can hold objectives and say go, and that's mostly the way to defeat the army. So he ended up despite the fact that the Harridan had hovered in order to get over there and cross the midline without having to rotate, he could have charged him, but again, charging up this building would have been so difficult that it's not even really worth trying. So he had the He had his Rhino with a bunch of Plague Marines come around the side here to fight the Tyrian warriors over on Objective 5. And the rest of his army just sort of slowly moved up. Now, I was firing the Hive Guard into the brick here, but again, because the Hive Guard can't, the Hive Guard can't see them, so they're -1 to hit, -1 AP, and or improve the opponent's save by 1, and they're all Armor of Contempted, so they're saving on 3s, and I'm wounding on 3s now because they're T5, and they have damage reduction. The Hive Guard would kill a single Plague Marine every time they shot. So there's all of these effects stacking on top of each other, making those guys way more difficult to kill, meant that Hive Guard unit, again, just like the previous game, way less efficient than it has been in the past. Conan Minis just started watching my stuff and it's fun. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate the patronage. Thanks for watching and hanging out and having a good time. Science Stat Forge World models can still be used in tournaments even though they haven't been upgraded yet. This is with the 8th edition Tyranid Codex. You can, yeah. I don't know how the updated. I guess you would still be able to take Forge World stuff in Tyranid armies in upgraded tournaments, but I think you give away all of your faction abilities if you do, because you aren't entirely Hive Tendril keyworded, which is a little bit awkward. But yeah, we're on this event specifically was on the 8th edition Codex because it happened the same day as the 9th edition Codex came out. Oh, Litany of Divine Protection is core only. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, that's my bad. Sorry. I just always see why people... I guess they use it on the big Crusader bricks and keep them alive. Yeah, that seems fine, though. Anyway. So that sort of same story continued for a while. I did have a little bit of a whoopsie-daisy here. On the next turn, the Harridan came over, and I was like, oh, I'll blow up the tank. It's disgusting resilient, but I only have to convert 2 attacks to kill it. And then I'll use the overrun to pull him back into the corner and screen out this corner against Deep Strikers. And it turns out, again, the Armor of Contempt coming into play every time here. I'm AP3, so I'm forcing him down to a 5+ save instead of a 6+ save. And he just made 3 out of 4. I converted 4 attacks with rerolls to wound from Voracious Appetite. And he made 3 out of 4 armor saves. One of them went through, didn't kill the Rhino, and I just sat there for a turn. I was like, this is awkward. My opponent can maybe come in my back line. He had, I think, a little bit of space. If he wanted to get in on Swarmlord, he probably could have dropped back here, maybe back here. And I was like, there's supposed to be a Harridan back here to stop that from happening. But that didn't happen, so this is awkward. Fortunately for my opponent, or fortunately for me, my opponent elected not to do that. He played a little bit more conservatively with his reserves than I think I would have done. I think I would have gone for the throat at that point. But and tried to be stealing my opponent's objective away, which is probably pretty good. But again, my opponent was putting a little bit of damage on the Hyrule in the middle. The Maliceptor was just chilling and hiding behind a building, and my opponent was just firing Blightlord Terminators into him every turn. Didn't have Tollkeeper though, which is almost every time I saw those Blightlord Terminators shoot, I was like, a Tollkeeper here would be net like 20% more damage or whatever. So sad. So that kind of same story continued. My opponent ended up bringing a lot of his reserves over here on Objective 1, mostly to threaten into the center of the table and to screen out or bodyguard for his Demon Prince. I had eventually shot this unit of Plague Marines low enough that they could no longer provide lookouts, so the Demon Prince ended up needing some bodyguards to help him out and to hold down that objective. The rest of the Terminators just sort of slowly pushed forward towards the center of the table. The Plague Marines on the other side, see if I have a picture of it. I don't. Good for me. The Plague Marines on the other side had broken out and charged into the warriors that were over there, ended up just wiping them out really easily. So my opponent actually he'd taken Stranglehold, so started to score Stranglehold this turn because he had taken all of the outside objectives, but I'm still racking bonus points by holding the middle objective, and my opponent isn't able to kill me off of that objective, so isn't himself scoring bonus points. So I was up pretty significantly on primary at this point. I elected to sort of force the issue a little bit, souped up the Tyranids with everything, and he went in and fought the Death Shroud Terminators. Breaking through to kill a couple of them, and then had aggressive surge for an additional attack. Although I don't think I had bioweapon bonded him, and I had bioweapon bonded the Hive Guard instead, which in hindsight was a mistake because they were getting rerolls to hit. And the Terminators were Miasma of Pestilence that turn. So I was hitting on 4s rerolling ones, and I didn't convert that many attacks. So I think I only killed 1 with the actual attacks, and then 2 with the breaking through. So I didn't wipe the unit, and my opponent retained control of this objective, although wasn't able on the follow-up turn to get to objective 3 to start to steal it. The Harridan and Swarmlord on the other side had moved around the corner here to clear out the Plague Marines that were over there and give me back control of that objective. And then we have the Moloch popping up in the side here. Who literally just popped up because everything else was held by objective secured stuff because all those Terminators had objective secured. There was no point in dropping him on the objectives because there's no way to give him objective secured before he pops up until the new Codex. Get ready for that new Codex Moloch, chat. If you have Lurk biomorphologies, you can give the Moloch Obsec and Countess 5 models, and that guy is going to be a nightmare. I'm not looking forward to play against that list. It's gonna be freaking wild, dude. Anyway, the Moloch just popped up to score me engaged in all fronts and ended up fighting the foul Blightspawn. Unfortunately, Molochs are just terrible at fighting. They're so bad. And the foul Blightspawn actually ended up, I think, when I popped up, he shot me. I charged him, he overwatched and shot me again, and then I did no damage on my fight, and he punched me. I think the foul Blightspawn was hands down winning that fight. Although the Moloch eventually did convert his big mouth attack and kill that guy, but it took quite a while for that poor Moloch. My opponent at one point, I think he had commented. I was like, "Oh man, look at how the Moloch has a billion attacks, but they're all terrible." And then I had to, because he has a tail attack in addition to his mouth attack and his Scything Talon attacks, I had to sort of roll out the attacks one at a time, all the different weapons one at a time. My opponent was like, they make you go through all this work for attacks that are this bad? I was like, yeah, dude. Just 8th edition Codex things, don't worry about it. The Blightlord Terminators eventually did get to the center of the table and start scoring the bonus objective there. The Hyrule, I actually had set up a situation where my opponent was going to charge back into me. I believe I was barriered and catalysted, so I didn't take too much damage from the attacks from the Death Shroud Terminators, and I tanked the Demon Prince charge to the face. My goal, because at that point, the Hyrule was still relatively low. He only had about 4 wounds left, I think. The goal was to... is that right? No. He was relatively low, but he was souped up. And the goal was to have him survive and then die on my turn. And I believe that he did get killed on my opponent's turn, which I was a little bit sad about. The reason that it's more impactful if he dies on my turn is that I can stack both Death Throws and both Death Surge or the Death Frenzy, I think, the Crusher Stampede version, and animated by the Hive Mind to activate both abilities. So I can, I believe you animate by the Hive Mind first, so you deal 3 mortal wounds. So I kill a Death Shroud Terminator there, then I can split my attacks to try to kill the Terminator and the Demon Prince. And I ended up dying before that stage, so I was a little bit sad. I was like, oh, I set up this cool turn, but I did that. But did mean that I had a lot of CP to spend, and I ended up spending that with the Harridan just shooting into the Blightlord Terminators and starting to remove a lot of them. And that eventually sort of pushed me out to a pretty hefty win. So my opponent was able to get a little bit on the scoreboard in that late game, but had suffered so many attrition and casualties that it hadn't ended up mattering. Again, there were a lot of these situations where these Armor of Contempted models are just slightly less consistent to kill than you expect them to be, and so they survive throughout the course of the game. And having objective secured on those Terminators, especially against the Crusher Stampede units that count as so many models, meant that those Terminator bricks were able to hold that central table space way more effectively than they used to be able to. You used to, previously you could just go tow that objective with a Crusher Stampede monster, and they would just steal it back, and the Death Guard player would be sad. But now you have to, at least in the 8th edition version of the army, you would have to spend to make them objective secured with the Leviathan strat. But in the new version, you don't have that anymore, assuming that it does get banned, which it should. Which means that you actually have to kill all those Terminators, which is it's way harder. So I think it's kind of the same story as we saw in the previous version, but these Armor of Contempted armies, while I don't know if the change wholesale makes them like immediately great, it certainly keeps them up with kind of the cutting edge of the metagame. The downside for my opponent was that he just took too long to get to the center of the table. He deployed everything way too conservatively, especially against indirect fire and an airplane. He can't really hide from me. I'm going to be able to get line of sight to him regardless. So there's no reason not to deploy like in this dense cover. Use your inexorable advance to ignore the movement penalty and just push directly to the center of the table. Stop me from being able to play in the sprinkler here. Take your 3 objectives over here and hold on to those for as long as possible to rack up primary objective points. And that's the way you beat the Harridan list, because the Harridan list can't hold objectives for shit. Fortunately for me, he didn't do that, so I was able to sort of rack up points. That ended up being a 92-55 victory. Can you cast Smite along a Synaptic Link? No. Only the range of a power is described in the power itself, and so the ones that can smite through, or the ones that can be cast through the Synaptic Link, are described in the Hive Mind Discipline powers. If needs feel bad about the quality of attacks into armor, bit sad about orcs. Yeah. I think the takeaway shouldn't be that like Tyranids are particularly bad against armor. The takeaway should be that power armor is better against all attacks, like full stop. Unless you're AP 0, you are being affected by Armor of Contempt. Or you have a Storm Shield, obviously. So it's less that a Tyranid army is bad at killing Space Marines, and it's more that Space Marines are harder to kill for every army in the game. Anyway, that moved me on to the finals game. There were going to be 2 undefeated players at the end, so this was one of the undefeated games. And I was up against another faction that was hit pretty effectively, or pretty impactfully by the Dataslate updates. This was Harlequins. So my opponent was, I think he had handily built his list in Battlescribe, but cut out the points increases that he got. So he was playing an 1830 points list. So a list that was that had already lost 170 points from what it previously had been at in the 9th edition version, the printing version of the Codex. But it also was significantly different, a significantly different archetype of list than you normally see out of, or you saw out of a Harlequins on release. So my opponent had a couple of different kind of just utility units. He had a couple of this one unit of 2 Skyweavers in here. He had a couple of characters. He had 1 Solitaire, 1 Death Jester, 2 Troop Masters, as well as a Shadowseer. The remainder of the list, almost entirely, were Fusion player troops, so 5-man troop squads, 2 Fusion pistols, a smattering of other weapons. He had a couple Neuro Disruptors in there as well, and all of those in Starweavers. There were 2 Void Weavers. I don't know why my pictures are sideways today, chat. I apologize. There were 2 Void Weavers in the list, so still a couple of Void Weavers, I think mostly to act as a long-range applicator of Luck of the Laughing God rerolls. So if your opponent is not engaging with you to early, so that you can't use your fusion pistols as early as you'd like, the Void Weavers can still be poking at your opponent. Not to mention the fact that you're awesome at scoring things like Engage on All Fronts, because the Void Weavers are just individual vehicles that can run off objectives. You're not quite as worried about holding objectives with them because they're not as good at doing it as the player troop Star Weavers. So they're just like not a terrible include kind of overall. Now, this is a matchup that I've played a couple times versus the previous version of Harlequins with the Harridan list, and it is tough for the Harridan because the biggest the hardest matchup that it has is these multiple small unit MSU style armies, where the fact that he can kill 800 points in a turn doesn't matter because your opponent doesn't have any units that are worth 800 points. And especially for Harlequins, it gets even tougher because the math of his gun, a single gun going into a Harlequin unit, it's highly unlikely that he actually one-shots one Harlequin unit with one gun, which means that your 700-point monster has to double tap a single, Starweaver or something to kill it. So if you think about a Starweaver, assuming that you're hitting on 4s, you might be hitting on 3s if you're close enough to it and you have a bonus to hit from bioweapon bond, which does not always happen. Assuming that you're hitting on 4s, you're going to shoot 8 times, hit 4 of them. You're winning on 2s, so you probably wound all 4. You can CP reroll 1 if you need to. But that means that your opponent has 4+ invulnerable saves to make or fail. And that basically puts it to a coin flip that you kill a single Starweaver with 1 cannon from a Harridan, since you have to convert 2 out of 4 of those wound rolls through the invulnerable save to kill the Starweaver. So that's a little tough for him. So he can shoot at 2 Starweavers, and if he splits the fire, he's taking 2 coin flips to kill 2 of them. He probably only kills 1 on odds, and if you don't concentrate fire on a single one, then he might kill nothing if your opponent just spikes their invulnerable saves. And that's a little bit tough, especially since my opponent, let me grab the count here, I think had like 7 or 8 Starweavers with the player troops in them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was 6 Starweavers with player troops, so maximum player troops, essentially. Plus the 2 Voidweavers, plus the Skyweaver unit. So my opponent had 9 of these units, and especially since the Skyweavers have the anti-reroll effect, the Hive Guard were going to be terrible at fighting at them. While they could hit the units that bailed out, they had very little chance of killing a Starweaver themselves, which meant that essentially the play pattern had to be that the Harridan moves up, kills 2 Starweavers, and then the Hive Guard kill everybody that were inside those Starweavers. But obviously the Harridan sometimes just flubs and doesn't kill one, which means your opponent's just like getting free damage on you. So, you're doing nothing to your opponent while they're attacking you. So this matchup was always really tough. And I don't know exactly how representative of the wider metagame this is. I know that Harlequin players in general are very afraid of the new Tyranid Codex, and I think as they should be, especially since it relies so heavily on mortal wounds. If you don't have a ton of psychic defense, which the Harlequin army does not, Maleceptors are just brutal to them. 2 triggered Maleceptor Psychic Overload activations kills a Starweaver. 2 more kills the unit inside the Starweaver, which means, not to mention the fact that you can start to neuroparasite and shoot the people who bail out. So if you engage into an army, a new Codex Tyranid army that's running Maleceptors, you're going to lose a ton of your transports in the psychic phase, then lose all their occupants in the shooting phase, and the game plan falls apart really quickly from there. So that matchup is going to be tough. This one, much easier for my opponent. We were also on Death and Zeal, so we had 5 objectives here, and the objectives were locking for objective secured units. So my opponent had 6 player troops as objective secured, and I had basically just 2 warriors and the Leviathan strat to see me through. So wasn't feeling too great about this one. My opponent ended up going first and pushing. We also had the. It's freaking WTC terrain, man. We were on a WTC style table this time, and unfortunately, because we are in these corner deployments, my opponent could move, just because they moved 22 inches, they just moved everything over to here and got full line of sight to my entire deployment zone. So, good old WTC. Never change, except due to maybe be removed. I don't know. So my opponent moved in, started shooting at my Hive Guard on turn 1. Only ended up killing one of them because I did spend 2 CP to transhuman them. And the Starweavers, their attacks are fine, but they're not anything to write home about. So fortunately, I didn't get too punished. Well, Hive Guard a little bit off the screen here. Here, let's move over a little bit. Here you go. There they are. There's the Hive Guard hiding in the corner. Please, sir, please don't shoot me with your shuriken cannons. So I got off a little bit easy there. The Voidweavers, I think, shot at the Harridan and basically did nothing because -1 to hit effects are a little bit tougher for Harlequins. They have to burn their Luck of the Laughing God dice to get rerolls, and they don't want to do that. So that's kind of a field bad. Especially into hitting on 4s. They went on 3s into an invulnerable save, so there's a lot of failure points along the range of that attack. So they tend to average pretty low damage. Now the downside here was that because my opponent was going first, the ball was kind of in my court. He was setting up a situation where he could start to lock in objectives. I had very little chance to stop them. I had taken Engage in All Fronts in this matchup, and I think that's a defensible pick because I don't really have great ways of killing my opponent. I also focused mostly on killing it to grind them down in Assassination. Grind them down is almost always a trap, but I didn't really feel like I had too many other options. So I ended up going with that. Oh, also important to note is my opponent blitzed his solitaire in to kill the unit of Tyranid warriors that were hiding back here. In hindsight, I maybe could have pushed them back here. I don't know if that would have saved them, but at least it would have made him a little bit tougher for him to get the solitaire on them. I was worried that they would get shot out of cover by the Star Weavers, and I would really have liked to have taken the 4+ saves against cover, but and thinking about it initially, I wasn't that worried about my opponent trading characters into me because it means I would get easy assassination and grind points. But on the flip side, I need all those models to hold objectives and score engage. And with that unit being dead immediately, I don't have engage anymore on that quarter. So it meant that the game plan of this warrior unit that was here running up to here to get engaged, the Harridan moving over, and then being able to score it over here with something else, was basically kaput. Fortunately, I did end up killing that guy. The Harridan did split fire between 2 Star Weavers, only killed one of them. The Hive Guard were very nice and killed everyone inside the Star Weaver. So we started to get a little bit of an attrition head. I moved up the Maleceptor and charged into the Star Weavers that were on this objective to tow the objective and steal it away from my opponent. He also had he had Catalyst on him, and I moved aggressively with the Neurothrope in order to get Onslaught into that guy. So basically extended my range as far as I could. We're not in an age of synaptic link chaining yet. So getting those psychic powers targeted is a little bit tougher than it is in the updated codex. But was able to get on this objective to stop my opponent from scoring a 12 and to get myself my lovely engaged on all fronts. From there, that meant that my opponent could focus fire on those guys. So he directed a lot of attacks into the Maleceptor. Fortunately, it spent a turn kind of just rebuffing a lot of saves on it, or a lot of wounds on its invulnerable save and Catalyst, which was very nice of it. I really appreciate you, Maleceptor. You're the best. He was a little bit sad that he couldn't just unleash, unparalleled psychic power and kill everyone within 12 inches of him, but he was happy to just make all his saves and not die, which was very okay. On the flip side, though, the Harridan ended up getting just blasted by shuriken cannon shots and the fusion pistol shots, and what my opponent was essentially ended up doing was, because my offense is so it's essentially overpowered in comparison to his defense. Saving his luck dice for defense was kind of silly. The way he was going to win the game was by killing all of my stuff that could hold objectives and then holding all the objectives himself, which he did a great job at doing because he was, had Star Weavers on every objective and was scoring Stranglehold and the Harlequin specific secondary every turn. So he was getting very good primary and secondary points. And the only way that he lost was if I still had models that could hold objectives by the end of the game, essentially. So if I won the attrition war with models left, that's his lost condition. So killing my stuff as quickly as possible, anything that could hold an objective, was his number one goal. So he was basically just shoveling Luck of the Laughing God dice into his offense. It also, and this is one thing that I talked a lot about with Zach Point when I interviewed him after he won Adepticon. You can go check that out on a previous episode of Tactical Tuesday. That when you're going first, your application of luck dice is a lot more difficult because you don't know whether or not, how many saves and how important the saves you're going to be taking are when you save those dice throughout your entire turn. So you're giving up a lot of efficiency there, whereas if you're going first, which my opponent was in this game, throwing out those luck dice immediately just makes sense because you know the exact situations in which they're going to be used because you're using them offensively on your turn. You don't have to bank them and potentially give them up at the end of the battle round. And he's tabling my ground forces much more quickly than I'm able to fight back against him. So he used a lot of luck dice this game. Ended up hitting the Harridan for about 15 or 16 damage, I think, between all those fusion pistol conversions. My saves actually, the Maleceptor stole all of the Harridan saves. I think the Maleceptor just made all his 4+, and the Harridan failed all of them. So he did take an extra lot of damage, essentially. A Troop Master made its merry way over with Foot in the Future, so the bonus to charge and the D3 plus 3-inch advance. Ended up charging the Neurothrope and Warriors that I had on my objective back here. So he, I think, clipped 2 Warriors with shooting with shuriken cannons and stuff, and then the Troop Master was able to kind of take their space and stand in here. He ended up splitting attacks between the 2, and I believe used the stratagem to ignore invulnerable saves. But I was able to... he rolled bad and I didn't die, essentially, is what happened. The warrior did get killed, so my obsec on my home objective was removed, but the Neurothrope survived and ran away, and I was very happy about him. Because mostly it meant that I got an extra psychic cast for a little bit longer. He was able to also give himself objective secured and steal the objective back. That did mean I got a second character, though, which felt pretty good. And the Harridan actually moved over to the center objective and charged a Star Weaver there and one-shot it, converted 1 attack through the invulnerable save, which, because the Harridan's 6 damage, just kills the Star Weaver, and I was able to pull the Harridan off the table in order to keep him safe for another turn. I was just going to be eating Fusion Pistol attacks otherwise, Fusion Pistols that may not have been going into anything else. In hindsight, I maybe could have kept him on the table because he's only scoring engage on all fronts, so I could have like pushed him maybe over here or something to score engage. But I don't know how big of a deal that would have made. The Moloch also popped up over here and stole this objective away from my opponent. But mostly just scored engage on all fronts. Good job, Moloch. You're the best. But again, stopped my opponent from getting a 12-pointer. We also Hive-Minded parroted the Maleceptor to steal this objective back from my opponent as well, who had bailed out Harlequin troopers to take it. And I stopped him from locking it with that Maleceptor. Unfortunately, though, while I did have some good saving throws earlier in the game, my saving throws did sort of run out on turn 3. My opponent went in, I think, with the Void Weavers and the Fusion Pistols on the Maleceptor. I think he fired like 2 Fusion Pistols at the Maleceptor, who had, if I remember correctly... Oh, he had cast Catalyst on the Harridan in case the Harridan failed it to pop off the table. So the Harridan took Catalyst with it when it left, which meant that the Maleceptor was relatively undefended. But I felt like it was okay. I think I had CP reroll money in the bank, and I had, I had damage reduction. I had only taken, I think, maybe 2 damage on the previous turn from the smattering of shots that went into him. So I was feeling pretty okay, but if I remember correctly, 2 Fusion Pistols converted and just one-shot him. Or 2-shot him, I guess. And I was like, oh, well, that's not good. I've now lost my objective secured battery over here and my ability to score that corner for engage. Unfortunately, as well, 2 boats went in on the Hierodule that was over here, and again, between the Void Weaver shots and the Fusion Pistol shots, a bunch of attacks converted. I flubbed my invulnerable saves, and he got vaporized too from pretty close to full. Actually, I think my opponent had done a little bit of damage to him with some ancillary attacks previously, but not enough to save him. The Death Jester lined up on the Neurothrope that was hiding in the corner here, ended up killing him as well. So this turn was pretty crippling, unfortunately. I'd lost, I had lost 1 objective, the ability to hold 1 objective in the corner here. I had lost the Hierodule, which is going to be threatening a lot up on this objective, which was locked in for my opponent, and the Harridan couldn't break. And I had lost my secondary caster and my reroll aura for the Hive Guard. So things went basically downhill pretty quickly from there. I was able to push it back a little bit with the Moloch and the Swarm Lord fighting over this objective. The Swarm Lord did get killed a turn later. Harridan survived unscathed and flew around the table for a little bit, killing Harlequins. But unfortunately, I wasn't quite able to claw things back from there. And my opponent scored, like I said, we both actually ended up maxing our primary objectives, simply because of the Death and Zeal bonus objective, which is to take an objective that you didn't hold at the start. And one interesting interaction with command phase abilities is that the bonus point checks at the start of your turn whether or not you hold the objective. I don't have the objective. I can then use a command phase ability like Hive Mind Imperative to give objective secured to the unit on the objective to then take the objective, which means I automatically have fulfilled the the requirements for the objective, as long as I stay on that objective until the end of the turn. So, and it's the same in the new codex for Swarmlord as well, because he has an objective secured ability that triggers in the command phase. You check at the start of the phase whether or not you hold the objective in question. If you don't, you then give the unit objective secured and then sit there for the rest of the game, the turn. And whether or not your opponent has left the objective or is even dead, you will be considered to hold that objective at the end, as long as you're standing there. So a couple times that happened and was able to get me a bunch of bonus points and and bring the game back to a close 88-97 in my opponent's favor. So he had taken retrieved Nakmun data, so basically only lost the 3 points that you get, that you lose for that Nakmun data. And it was just a case of my inability to deal sort of functional damage to my opponent's army over the course of the game. The Harridan could kill a 90-point transport every turn, but if you'd only do that, if you do that every turn for 5 turns, then you've only killed 500 points, and you're spending 700 on the Harridan, and that's just not a winning proposition because that doesn't even clear an objective. So I think it was generically a bad matchup. I'd be much more interested to see how the updated codex plays into the new Harlequins. I think it's much better, but I kind of knew that going in. That is the price you pay for playing Mimi Harridan list, is that sometimes you hit a matchup that is just mathematically almost impossible for you to win. And that's what we did today. But still ended up with a 2-1 record. Losing in the finals doesn't feel so bad, especially if it was a relatively close game. And I think maybe if I had gone first and was able to, sort of score engaged on all fronts with impunity and put myself in a little bit more aggressive of a position, I could have had a chance at it, but it was going to be difficult from the get-go. But that said, the updated Harlequin points costs, while I don't know if the faction is sort of entirely fixed or whatever, and I don't know, to be honest, if they should be put at like a 50% win rate or something. It does feel like they are significantly less abusive than they were in the past. I think with my opponent having 200 additional points of Void Weavers, all of which got range reductions and rerolls on their defenses, I would have had almost no chance of clearing my opponent's army, because those Void Weavers could have been dealing significant damage back to me at longer range than I would be dealing to them. So I feel like the reason that the score is close, as close as it was because of the Dataslate updates. So in the context of reviewing these games and looking at the Dataslate updates that were impactful, I do think that these new Harlequin points costs are a very big deal in the matchup. And I'm looking forward to seeing where Harlequins go, because I think clearly the standard Harlequin playstyle of taking a bunch of Starweavers, filling them with Harlequin troopers and characters, and then just running around the table is still going to be one of the most effective armies in the game, as it was in the previous version. And as we saw the game moving towards these more static, kind of gunline-oriented armies that were not good at responding to Harlequins, and really only had an answer for them in their indirect fire, which has now been nerfed, we already saw 8th edition Harlequins making a comeback, and I did a video on it, in the previous metagame, where they were able to fight against Tau, even powerful Tau lists, even Borkan Tau lists that should theoretically be a bad matchup for them. The Harlequins were able to fight back through, and I think with an entire new and updated codex worth of abilities that has almost strictly improved the game plan and the damage output of the army, this style of army that's just focused almost purely on Harlequin troopers is still going to be super duper duper strong. So I think much unlike some of the other nerf factions like Custodes, where there are kind of transformative changes to the faction and you're going to have to really rethink how you approach playing Custodes lists, I think that Harlequins are just fine and are basically just going to be encouraged to shift off of their reliance on Void Weavers, which I think is totally appropriate, because Void Weavers were broken at 90 points. And I think that at 130 they are now. I think that the faction is going to be much more interesting. So anyway, that's what I have to say about that event. So what I'd like to do is take a quick look at, now having played and seen a having played and seen an entire weekend of play using the new Dataslate, is just go through the Dataslate itself and talk about, what we think of all of the abilities now that we've seen them on the table, or of all of the changes, excuse me. So I'm just gonna go find my copy of the Dataslate here. Let's go. Here we are. And I'd like to also include the remainder of the community in this one as well, chat. So if anybody has played, I know there's a couple people commenting about the changes that they've been watching. If anybody has any thoughts about these updates and experiences that they had over the weekend, I'd really like to hear from you. Andrea, hello from Germany. How's it going? Can I please talk in German? Unfortunately, no. I don't know how to speak in German. We'll have to get Fred from Breaking Heads on, and then he can talk in German for me. That won't be confusing at all. He can just talk over me in German the entire broadcast. It'll be fine. All right, let's do it. So, I talked a lot about Armor of Contempt. I don't know how much more it's worth talking about it. One thing I am interested to see is are the effects on her, Adeptus Sororitas, because I think that it's a change that feels like it's going to kind of alter how well the backline units in Adeptus Sororitas operate. So things like Retributors and these Battle Sister Squads that are holding backline objectives and fighting other utility units. That's where that ability is going to make them more difficult to kill. But the frontline units are typically either Sacrosancts or Repentia, and neither of those benefit from this ability. The other thing I'd like to see, and we've been talking a lot about Space Marines, is Grey Knights. And I think Grey Knights are poised to have an interesting effect in the metagame, because we're moving into an era where Tyranids are going to be the number one faction, full stop. And Tyranids are, live and die by their psychic phase, in my opinion. And Grey Knights have the greatest amount of not only psychic defense, but also mortal wound defense out of almost any faction in the game. So taking less damage from the Tyranid psychic phase, having the greatest chance to block the Tyranid psychic phase, and having Armor of Contempt on top of that is really interesting. I almost wonder if it's, and I've been thinking about this because I'm looking at my Grey Knights army over, which is up on the shelf behind me, and that's almost entirely built out of infantry and Terminators. I'm almost wondering if we see a resurgence of Grey Knight Terminators with this Armor of Contempt ability, because the Terminator profile in general is going to be a little bit more impactful. Obviously, their Dread Knights themselves don't get the upgrade, but all of their infantry will. And if you are playing Terminator characters, I think that's pretty good. The indirect fire weapons change is obviously one that I talked about quite a bit because it affected my Hive Guard over the course of the event. How much it changes Tau is my big real question. Tau and Craftworld Eldar. It feels like Night Spinners may be dead for Craftworld Eldar because they just don't hit hard enough to get around the penalties you have for firing indirectly with them. And they aren't especially difficult to kill if they are exposed to your opponent. So if your opponent can shoot back at them, they're probably gonna die. So I don't know how often you see Night Spinners played, but I wonder if you start to turn them into Fire Prisms, which while they're more expensive and they're more difficult to use because they take more resources, you typically have to set up for a linked fire turn, use your linked fire, then use a Fire and Fate ability or a battle focus ability to get them out of line of sight to sort of indirect fire with them. But that said, you don't suffer any of these penalties, and your base damage output is much higher. So I'd be interested to see how that changes. I don't think that we see any reduction to the amount that they play D cannons. To be fair, I think D cannons are still going to be probably the best indirect fire in the game now. But the real question is Tau Empire, in my opinion, because they were so predicated on smart missile systems, and now those smart missile systems being so much worse is a big deal. Not to mention the fact that their airbursting fragmentation projector blobs are going to be less effective now as well. Losing the AP from Monka and losing and improving your opponent's your target's armor save by 1 is a pretty big deal for sure. So whether or not maybe you just turn them into burst cannons and just go from there. I don't know. That'll be interesting to see. Shadow and the Warp will hinder Grey Knights. Well, the difference, you're not wrong, but the part about Grey Knights that I'm worried about is that they also effectively have Shadow in the Warp because they have a +1 to deny. So they are good at stopping Tyranid psychic powers, which can turn off things like the Maliceptor combo. If it was Deathwatch and not Grey Knights, it'd be a fluffy counter. Yeah, it is funny how terrible Grey Knights have traditionally been against demons. Deathwatch have always been interesting because they've really wanted to be a counter to Tyranids, but they've always been so bad at it. I think it's the fact that almost every version of Deathwatch that have existed has been predicated. They're trying to be the Special Forces SWAT Marines, right? And that means that they play infantry squads that get up close to an enemy army. And against some armies, that's fine. But against Tyranids, that usually means you get killed by Gene Stealers. And that has always been my experience with the Deathwatch matchup. Even in 8th edition, when Deathwatch were a much more dynamic and a much different version of what they are now. And even more offensively oriented with all their poison bolters. And they would just get killed by Gene Stealers. I don't know. I would just kill them. So, maybe it was the fact that they were built around these like mini Marines that were kind of hokey to use, but it never felt like an army that was like mechanically very adept at killing Tyranids in 40k. Bradley hasn't played against Grey Knights yet, but playing against them this coming weekend. The heavy nid list with 6 heavy Venom cannons. Yeah, so I played an interesting matchup. I think I might have taken some pictures of it. I played an interesting game against Grey Knights relatively recently, 2 weeks ago. I don't know if I have a picture of it. No, it doesn't look like I do. Sad. Where my opponent was playing, kind of a classic triple Dread Knight build, and I was playing a little bit, kind of a little bit more well-rounded, I guess a more balanced Tyranid army out of the new codex. I was playing double Exocrine, so very kind of similar to heavy Venom cannons, and 1 Maliceptor and 2 Hive Tyrants. And the game was super interesting because neither of us could really afford to play too aggressively with our guns, because if my opponent comes in and drops all of the offensive debuffs onto an Exocrine and shoots them and kills them, the Exocrine, it's an 1 Exocrine I have to kill a Dread Knight, but the Exocrines are what I need to kill the Dread Knights, because the Hive Tyrants don't do it quite as efficiently as I'd like. So it was a very cagey, very cat and mouse game, and I think it ended up coming down to a relatively close score at the end. I did it. My last turn was kind of a blowout. Like as soon as everyone committed, and I think this is the takeaway generally, is that the new Tyranid Codex, you can't commit into it. You have to make it come to you, because if you go out and fight them on their turns, they will just kill you. And that's basically what happened. Was that I got a couple good swings. I got a fight after the High Tyrant that was really impactful, and then ended up just blitzing basically the entire Grey Knights army in one go, after I had softened them up a little bit. But it was such an interesting and cool matchup that I'm kind of here for it. I think the Grey Knights matchup is going to be really cool. That said, I do think that like if you're pushing like super the dumbest stuff in the Tyranid Codex is probably going to be better than the dumbest stuff in the Grey Knights Codex, to be fair. I don't know if they have a good answer to Harpies. I think Harpies are going to kill them, but who knows? You can lynch pin, so most stuff will be far enough away to deny. Not your Maliceptors, though. Can't do that. They basically they have the greatest chance out of almost any faction because everything in the army denies, and they all deny it +1. They have the greatest chance out of everything at stopping the Maleceptor combo. So if the best Tyranid armies are ones that are predicated on the Maleceptor combo, Grey Knights are going to be a good counter to them. Not to mention the fact that even when you combo off of the Maleceptor, they're going to be saving it on 5s. You can still deal a lot of damage to them, but I don't think it's enough damage to... I don't think it's enough damage, like, to recoup your expense on the Maleceptors. But we'll have to see. I don't know. There's also other mortal wound output from Tyranids, like, Harpies have bombs and stuff. There's just, like, there's a lot of random mortal wounds that they end up doing. The Reaper of Obliterax hits you for a mortal wound at the end. So, you, like... the Reaper, now especially against Armor of Contempt, you save on 6s against the Reaper itself, and then, so it like kills, it used to just automatically kill an entire Grey Knight squad when it attacked, but now it kills a couple Grey Knights and then plows them for mortals, and then you 5 up against the mortals, and there's a non-zero chance that the Reaper of Obliterax actually doesn't kill them. And even those Warriors, right? The Warriors are only AP2 on all of their attacks, which means that they're reduced to AP1 now, so you're saving 50% of the time against them. Not to say that, like, Warriors probably, if you're charging 5 Space Marines, you're going to kill them probably, but there are chances where they just 4+ save out of it. And you're like, oh, this sucks. So far, I've really liked the changes to Bodyguard. I think, especially for the updated Tyranid Codex, it makes the Hive Tyrant play, like, a lot more interesting. You have to actually play around the Bodyguard keyword, instead of just being able to do whatever you want, essentially. So, personally for me, it's kind of forced my army to play more aggressively, which I think just makes the game more fun. I've moved to playing bigger, tankier stuff that can stand in front of my Hive Tyrants, because the Hive Tyrants are going to be benefiting from Bodyguard. The other thing is that it could potentially do is force you to play more aggressively with your Tyrant Guard as well. Because the Tyrant Guard can also just look out, sir, for the Hive Tyrants at any unit size. So even if there's one Tyrant Guard who is closer to the target, to the attacking unit than the Hive Tyrants are, that one Tyrant Guard is going to stop you from shooting. How it affects other armies, though, I think one thing that I played against a slightly disappointing Salad with Iron Hands on Friday, and he was unused to playing without Bodyguard with his Iron Hands, which obviously were built around, constructed around bodyguarding for the character Dreadnought, and without the ability to do that fast stuff that can sneak in, and in this case it was Harpies, but otherwise fast stuff that can sneak around and get access to those characters. Now that those characters don't have a recourse from it, they're just going to get eaten by even if they're in range of Bodyguard, if you can get close enough to them. So again, I mean, you do have to play much more conservatively with those characters, which I think is good. You can't just put them out in the middle of the table and say go, and your opponent can't do anything about it. The other thing I'm interested to see in Adeptus Sororitas is how much the Miracle Dice change affects them, because as we saw on Throwdown Thursday last week, we saw Alex playing Adeptus Sororitas, and their ability to score on Leap of Faith is much better than it was, which means that Adeptus Sororitas have a really good secondary objective just sitting in the wings waiting for whenever they need it, which is pretty cool. Adeptus Custodes, I think, are still going to be putting some results up, but they certainly aren't going to be sort of the powerhouses that they were, and I think they're paying a little bit for being as dominant as they were for as long as they were. Hopefully, I know a lot of people are just kind of throwing Adeptus Custodes away and being like, this faction's terrible now, I hate them. I would like to see some more innovation in the army rather than just writing them off entirely. And I think moving to different, trying out sub-factions that aren't just Emperor's Chosen is probably worthwhile. I think the Solar Watch infantry list is still interesting. Less so if you are if you're fighting against Mortal Wound, so that's going to suck. If we're in a Mortal Wound meta, then Emperor's Chosen might still be the way to might still end up being the way to go. But a big Solar Watch army that has, with all those infantry models just taking the middle of the table is going to be pretty difficult to deal with. And especially since, if you're talking about Tyranids have really terrible objective secured. Although Warriors specifically might be able to fight those guys. Although they are saving up 3s against them. I don't know how that fight ends up going. Which means that you can out-obsect them on center objectives pretty easily. So, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting. But I do think that Adeptus Custodes will probably hit the hardest out of all these changes, but I don't I don't think it's as hard to like doomsay the faction and say they're terrible now. I think they're just above average now. But while we just talked about Harlequins still being incredibly effective, I don't think this quite the same is true for Adeptus Custodes. But I don't think Adeptus Custodes like have been reduced to like like Gene Stealer cult level or whatever. I'm interested to see if the Salamanders change sees any play. I know I'm a little bit afraid of that, and one of the reasons that, I know that there's a lot of foot Space Marines and especially foot Salamanders stands out there. I know a lot of people are going to be moving to these like foot Space Marine style armies, and if they do so, and they're relying on this like Armor of Contempt, AP reduction, transhuman into no rerolls, which is basically what Custodians have been doing to us for the last like 4 months. Then mortal wound output is going to be the only way to effectively kill them. And that's one of the reasons that I know personally I'm probably planning on doing more mortal wounds with my army rather than trying to engage with the attack sequence. I'm going to be smiting people, and I'm going to be bombing people, and I'm going to be maliceptoring people. Loss of objective secured will really limit builds. Well, it's only objective secured on the non-troops custodians, right? Somebody pointed out that it was that Talons of the Emperor wouldn't get this, but I don't believe that's the case. I think your prosecutors will still get them because they are troops units in your detachment. Anyway, I think it forces you to put more emphasis on your troops units, but like the times where like Trajan Valoris was holding down an objective, I think were like those were the times where the faction was really like just flexing on other people, where it wasn't like, oh man, I didn't engage correctly. I wasn't able to take the objective away from you. That's too bad. It was like, this idiot has fucking OBSEC for no reason, and you're taking the objective away from me. And there's nothing I could do about it because he's hiding behind a bunch of dudes. He's bodyguarded. Like, it's like killing a dedicator transport with OBSEC basically. So I think this, and my heart does go out to Custodes Terminators, who were good because they had OBSEC and could fight other, like utility units and kill them. But I think that's a small price to pay for not having this faction be dominant in games where both players don't have easy access to objectives secured. Because there were situations where you could physically not take objectives away from Custodes armies, because you had to kill 2 units before you could target the character, and you didn't have the punch to kill 3 units, the 2 units in front of the character and the character themselves, through all of these defensive stratagems and invulnerable saves and moment shackles and 5+ damage ignores and all that stuff. So I think that, if that character doesn't have objective secured, so you only have to kill 2 units to take the objective away, I think that's fine. And if that ends up being a huge problem, I mean, again, we should Custodes players should rethink the faction rather than throw it out. Guard may be fun to play again. Spam last cannons, punishers, enjoy the sound of thunder. Just rolling thunder all over your opponent. Yeah, I don't know. I think I hesitate to say that guard will be good. I do think that this certainly helps, and I appreciate that the general gist of this data slate. And one thing that I don't know if has been said enough is that the general gist of the data slate was that things got buffed, right, rather than debuffed. We saw a slight debuff to Custodes, right? Or we saw a significant debuff to Custodes. We saw a slight debuff to Harlequins, and we saw indirect fire and bodyguard, which affects, like, realistically, because it basically no longer affects Tyranids. It affected like Tau. It affected Eldar. Who else is playing indirect fire heavily? Those are mostly the armies, right? So we saw like Tau get hit a bunch of different ways. They got significant debuffs. Custodians got significant debuffs. Eldar got reasonable nerfs. And then like literally 60% of the game got huge buffs in Army of Contempt, in the Sororitas buffs, in the Militarum buffs. And so I think generally speaking, the tenor of this data slate was just these huge buffs to stuff that was underperforming, and I think that's fucking awesome. That's much more invigorating than just watching other factions get like clowned on with huge nerfs. Yeah, Death Guard got buffs for sure. Death Guard got like they already got Armor of Contempt, which almost might have been fine for Death Guard, but the fact that they, Death Shroud Terminators also get objective secured, that's fucking wild, dude. That's so good. Whether or not that's going to change how the faction operates, I don't know. I kind of doubt it. But I think that their win rate will slowly tick up a little bit. But that said, whether or not these buffs are enough to put like Astra Militarum in a really strong spot, I don't know. I think that it's probably unlikely, unfortunately, for Astra Militarum. But I do believe, and I do think Astra Militarum are very cool. One thing that I like about this change is that it is a detachment ability, so it still works in your soup detachments. So if you're taking a mixed Imperium army, your Astra Militarum components are going to be more effective. So if you're taking Scions in your the rest, to supplement the rest of your army, then you're already going to be doing that much more damage. Death Guard got the indirect fire nerf. Yeah, but like also did they? Because Plague Burst Crawlers very rarely like actually hid from people, right? It was just sometimes they got a little bit of additional efficiency being able to target something that was hiding from them, but 90% of the time you'd put them on the line or like, in line of sight of your opponent to shoot their entropy cannons anyway. So now it's just kind of, it's not that they're doing less damage. You're just, your ability to target whatever you wanted is a little bit reduced. Some cat factions are kind of a joke, so I don't know if I would put Necrons in that category, right? So Necrons didn't get any like huge buffs here, but Necrons statistically, if we discount the overperformers, right? So if we discount Eldar, plus Harlequins, Tau, Custodes, and we cut out like Craft Worlds and Tyranids, right? Necrons were right there. As the top performing kind of mid-tier faction. And despite the fact that, I'm sorry if you're a Necron player, but y'all are really whiny. And I understand that it sucks that your faction is not like the number one faction in the game, but that doesn't mean that they're like god-awful. I've seen so much more complaints from Necron players than I have from like people playing Astra Militarum, despite the fact that Astra Militarum were basically literally unplayable. And I think the fact that other factions got significantly worse performing factions got buffed does not mean that Necrons are that much worse. I think Necrons are still are still in a fine spot, because we have to remember, right? The goal of these changes are not to make other factions super powerful and turn the top factions into garbage. The goal of these data sheets is to squeeze everyone at the same level. So the Necrons were significantly outperforming Space Marines, and Necrons stayed the same, and Space Marines got raised up a peg. So now they are closer to being even, which is the ultimate goal of these rebalance updates, which I think is fine. No, chat. Yeah, you gotta reread the Astra Militarum rule. It says if every regiment unit from your army is drawn from the same regiment. So if you have non-Astra Militarum model units that are missing the bracketed regiment keyword, you do not lose Hammer of the Emperor. It's only if you take units from from separate regiments. So if you do the thing, I think I've talked about this in the Discord, but I don't know if I talked about it in a video. You used to, if you do the thing where you take a Death Corps of Krieg detachment in addition to, or I guess that wouldn't even change it, right? Because Death Corps of Krieg isn't a bracketed regiment role. Regiment keyword. Who knows? I have no idea how it works. Basically, as long as you don't mix sub-factions in the Astra Militarum, then you're good. How many complaints from Chaos Space Marine players? Very few, to be fair. Chaos Space Marine players are mostly, I don't know. Chaos Space Marine players are too creative to complain about stuff. Chaos Space Marine players are like, don't worry, guys. Oh, the meta changed? I will reach into my literally endless bag of ridiculously jank interactions and pull out a potential solution that will increase my win rate by 10%. Chaos Space Marine players be wild, dude. Orcs, Necrons, Genestealer Call will be non-existent and competitive. I think Orcs and Genestealer Call probably so. And I think I wish Orcs just got an ability here, right? Just right under here that said, you ignore the penalty for dense cover. That's all I want for Orcs, because right now, or you ignore hit modifiers, or maybe it's during Speed Law, you ignore hit modifiers or something. Because right now, the problem with Orcs isn't that Orcs are bad, because I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I think Orcs are fucking awesome. The problem is that sometimes you hit a table with bad terrain, or you hit an opponent with negative hit effects like Venom Thropes or a Vexilla Magnifica or anything like that, and an Orc army absolutely falls apart. It literally cuts their damage output in half. But the fact that Speed Mob has never been addressed is crazy. That army is very good, and I will not hear otherwise. I think I think I said this in the Discord as well when this update came out. People are like, "Oh, there's no updates for Orcs," and I was like, "Let me tell you, here's the thing, all right." The update for Orcs was that they haven't changed attack out of the sun, so you can't use it on the same unit multiple times. So you still get bouncing Def Coptas. The question is how effective those Def Coptas are. The fact that their AP is lower, I think, is still fine because they were overkilling whatever they were shooting at anyway. And it's only lower against some armies. In a lot of matchups, that change is meaningless. In about half the games you're going to play, Armor of Contempt doesn't exist, so you don't care about it. The problem is that when they're minus with a hit, they do nothing, and then you dealing a bunch of stuff with your Def Coptas is meaningless, and I think that sucks for sure. But I'm not gonna say that Orcs are like unplayable garbage. What is the mob saying about Adeptus Mechanicus these days? I think they're Adeptus Mechanicus are just sort of generically fine. I think AdMech are probably in a they've been power crept to a position where they're kind of in the middle of the road. And their melee builds are good, their ranged builds are fine. And I think that's just where they exist. So I don't think you can't really complain about them or anything. They're just there. The rest of Orcs are not internally balanced with Speedwa. Yeah, but we're not. When you talk about a faction power level, you don't talk about all the bad things in the faction, right? You can't be like, oh, well, Space Marines are bad because Predators are Land Raiders are one of the worst units in the game. And you're like, yeah, but who cares? Space Marines are, at this point, Space Marines are good because of like Black Templars builds and Iron Hands builds and these like hyper optimal lists. So if you're talking about Orcs being good or bad, you're probably either talking about Kilreg lists being good or you're talking about the Army of Renown being good. It's like saying Tyranids were bad because, Ripper Swarms aren't very good. You're like, that doesn't make any sense. Crusher Stampede was insane. So you have to take into account the power of that army of renown when you're talking about the faction power level. And I think there is a criticism that orcs can't play the way that orcs conceptually want to play, which is these big bricks of armies, of models. But I think that's a knock-on effect of 9th edition. 9th edition is so anti-horde, it's wild. It's crazy. The introduction of the blast keyword killed most of those armies, and the versions that it didn't, Games Workshop is doing their best to kill themselves. And I don't think that that's like a fault of the Orc Codex, because I do think orcs have other viable builds. I'm not going to tell you that I think orcs are like the best faction in the game, but I think they're, again, right in that mid-tier power level where they're, maybe they're slow, they're like kind of on the bottom side of the 50%. But, I think Genestealer cults have a lot more to be worried about than orcs do, for sure. Nids can be strong without Crusher Leviathan. 8th edition Nids too. No, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's the case. Adeptus Mechanicus sound healthy? Yeah. Yeah, I think Adeptus Mechanicus are in a pretty decent spot. They put up results still. We see, podiums with Adeptus Mechanicus armies and occasional GT wins with Adeptus Mechanicus armies. Obviously, Skitarii Veteran Cohort is still a very viable build, and their toolbox is so deep that it's difficult to it's hard to build a bad Mechanicus list. But they're no longer at the stage where they're destroying people, and part of it is like the nerfs that they got, right? Because they got hit over and over and over again with nerfs. Like they were the they were the Tau of their day, where they would kill everyone with ranged attacks at 1,000,000 inches away. There's nothing you could do about it, and until they got nerfed 1,000 times, that continued to be the case. But they've gotten annihilated with nerfs, and on top of that, the power creep of the game has pushed them, steadily backwards, and I think that's put them into a pretty reasonable place. I think post all of these nerfs, they were still probably, they were like a top 8 faction or whatever, but now they're right in the middle of the road. What supplement do I think is inside the new book? That's a great question. What supplement do I think is in the new book? It'll probably be for I would say Astra Militarum, but Astra Militarum already got a supplement, so I doubt that they would double up on that. So it'll probably be for a recently released codex, I think. It will probably be for probably not Knights. I think Knights will get one after their codex is released, so maybe Eldar? All orcs need is a point change, 1 point drop in boys, or war boss leadership buffs. I don't know. I don't even think that would change it too much. I think you just have to rethink how large units work, essentially. The problem right now is that the blast keyword hurts them so hard, right? Morale hurts them. So like you said, more changing the war boss morale mechanics would certainly help. That would go a long way for sure. But GT also scores you a bunch of points if you play against the Horde army because of no prisoners. So your opponent gets literally just gets a free 15 points if you're playing 1,000,000 orc boys, and that's freaking sucks. So you'd have to change these armies that have vast swaths of attacks. You'd have to change how how blast works. You'd have to change how orc morale works, and you'd have to change secondary objectives. You'd have to do it would be a 3-tier plan to make orc boy spam good. And on top of that, you also have to have a profile that does significant damage when you get there. And I think the problem that Orc players are complaining about right now is that an AP1 Orc Choppa is not going to do enough damage when it touches a Space Marine or whatever. It already sucked against Adeptus Custodes. Like, Adeptus Custodes, you would put a bunch of shield guys in front of them, save on 2s. And despite the fact that Orcs hit 1 billion attacks, they would kill like 1 guy, and then Custodes would kill half the Orc unit, and the rest of them would run away. I think that's just sad. I don't know, but I do think, but like I said, I think the Orc kill rig lists are very good. I think that the mid-range Orc lists that are, you know, they're taking like kill rigs and characters, and I played against a Goss list with Gazgul Thraka the other day and two kill rigs, and it almost kicked the shit out of me. I was like, this is legit. And then I think also the Speed Mamba is very good. I think there are 2 pretty solid builds in there. If you don't want to play Leviathan, but instead favor Nidzilla style post Crusher Stampede, which Hive Fleet would you go? I think the obvious answer is Behemoth for sure, and I think it would mostly just be Behemoth. If you want to take big Nids, if you want to take ranged bugs, you'd play Chronos. So things like Tyrannifexes, especially with Flamers. I think even Hierodules have a place in Chronos lists. Chronos also, I'm going to fact check myself here before I misspeak. Chronos also, I believe, has Lurk Biomorphology, so they get the Obsec ability. I don't think you necessarily need Behemoth for the extra strength and the +1 to wound thing to play melee stuff. So I think the melee stuff is probably fine without it. Chronos does have Lurk Biomorphologies, yeah. So you can play Chronos to get the Obsec if you want to play the Flamer oriented stuff. You can play Behemoth to get the Obsec if you want to play the more melee oriented stuff. I think both of those are pretty effective at playing the Nidzilla style lists. I think that list is really good, and I think if we see a tone down to stuff like the Tyranid Psychic phase, and you maybe like, if Tyranids get nerfed, which I imagine they will, in a way that reduces the effectiveness of Hive Nexus, I think you see Behemoth monster lists come in. And I think those lists are very cool. I think there's also an argument for Kraken. The problem with Kraken, their stratagem is so good. 8-inch auto advance is like amazing. The problem with Kraken is it doesn't have Hive Nexus. Hive Nexus is just insane. But it is what it is. What's my ad hoc advice for bringing in new and young players to the hobby, like 12 to 15? You kind of just have to show them the cool models. Like, that's, I know, personally, that's the age that I originally got into miniature wargaming. And a visually inspiring layout, like, absolutely floored me. I was kind of primed for it because my dad always did model trains, and so I was already kind of keyed into modeling and how cool it was. But then I went to a Warhammer store. My family lived in Ireland for a while. This is a tangent. My family lived in Ireland for a while, and we went to a Games Workshop store while we were there. I think while we were visiting Britain, actually. And I saw the Space Marines on like a modeled field with hills modeled into it and trees, and it was the old 3rd edition starter set that had Space Marines fighting Dark Eldar, like the old spiky Dark Eldar models, and I was like, this is the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen. And I think you gotta get kids in on that visual level. You're not gonna convince them about like you're not gonna convince them about the depth of the lore or the mechanics or like how good stratagems are or combo play. They're gonna learn that themselves, but what you get them in on is how fucking cool the little Space Marines are, and that's, I think, where you hook little tiny kids. VOD 2877, can you make a Trigon Prime work? I don't know. I think I would. So I mean, that's another potential typo in the Tyranid Codex, right? You can't give character keyworded stuff adaptive physiologies, and I think I would like wait until that gets fixed. It's kind of not even worth thinking about right now. You can maybe like play it in Leviathan and like push Hive Nexus onto it or whatever. You could also you could like wombo combo a big what's the word? Like a big like charge out of deep strike combo. You can, if you can get a Lictor engaged, so you can play maybe Kraken, and you Kraken strat to get an 18-inch charge, 18-inch plus 2d6 charge in order to trigger a Pheromone Trail and Shard Lure somebody. So and then you can Synaptic Lure as well. So they're 3d6. They need a 7 on 3d6 dropped low, so the reroll, which is probably a 90-ish% chance to make that charge out of Deep Strike. So I think that's like the best you can deliver them. But and then from there, you're kind of relying on either like maybe Maw Claws to get the damage through, so like +1 attack full rerolls. But the problem is that their damage, they have a billion attacks, but their damage is low. And they have to jump through all these hoops to get engaged because they're not survivable enough to survive if they're placed on the table. They're like a Hive Tyrant with none of the benefits of being a Hive Tyrant. It's like sort of a weird unit. So, like, if you're really pushing for it, you can make one of those things work. But is it worth trying? Just take a dude with wings and give him bodyguard. Like, give him, like, look out for him. I don't know. Like, flying Hive Tyrant is so sick. Is there an official word on whether Crusher Stampede is dead? No, it's not. But as far as I know, every single TO that I've seen talk about it or talked to about it has banned it. So while it's not official, I would assume that you can't play Crusher Stampede, and that I include myself in that because I have recently ruled that Crusher Stampede can't be played with the new codex, just because it would be broken and stupid. I don't like that. Aaron proceeds, big fear is that they lose interest from defeats. I've been focusing on leveling the playing field so they don't walk away thinking the only cool thing is the models. Yeah, I mean, I think I have less input on that. I know, speaking as someone who at one point was a kid, I never like, I don't ever remember myself caring that I lost games. At least like when I was a little kid and my parents would take me to the GW store and let me loose for a day to play a game. I lost like every game that I played that I can remember. And I never cared so much, but that is probably more personal. And I do think that there's probably more, that was I guess that was kind of at the same point that like a video gaming is really taking off from a multiplayer standpoint. And so I guess maybe there's more of a competitive bent to gaming from kids these days, but that I don't know. I can only speak from personal experience, and my personal experience is that I remember losing a lot of games, and I never remember that stopping me from playing them. Roland 666, how would I fix Death Guard? I would try to I would play with the new updates and see how we feel. I don't know if we can talk about fixing a faction that just got a ton of like huge updates before we see exactly how it shakes out. Victoria, with new Tyranids around the corner, is there any reason to just play GSC over the fluff? Is there any reason to just like to play Genestealer Cult alongside Tyranids, or to play only Genestealer Cult? You play Genestealer Cult because it like plays the deep strike game more than Tyranids do. Tyranids are like set up on the Tyranids like set up on the line and walk at your opponent slowly, and your opponent's like, oh, please don't touch me, the scary Tyranids. But a Genestealer Cult play, if you want to play like the finesse deep strike and, you know, hit and run game, you play Genestealer Cult for sure. They play totally differently. I would never play them together though with the new Tyranid rules, because the Tyranids break their faction abilities when they soup, which is not good. Not good. Behemoth and Zilla, what goes in, what gets banned? I played Carnifexes and I really liked them. I played 5 Screamer Killers and 2 Hive Tyrants, a combination of either Swarmlord and a Winged or 2 Winged. Either one's fine, I think, in my opinion. And I really like that list. I think right now I'm probably focusing on like Leviathan Psychic stuff, you know, Maliceptors and Harpies and things like that, because I think it's the strongest. But were that to get nerfed, or were me to burn out of it, which will probably, if Harpies are as good as I think they are, I think that will happen very quickly, then I will probably play Behemoth Carnifexes, to be fair. Kid or crew, come play Kill Team? I'm not gonna play Kill Team with you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you can't make me. I would, the skirmish game market is this is gonna sound so harsh. I apologize for everyone who's a GW stan who's in the chat. The skirmish game market is too saturated for me to waste time playing a Games Workshop game if I want to play a skirmish game, okay? So, the Games Workshop should stay in their lane. They should make games that have where your armies consist of many models, because that's what they do. But there are other manufacturers with better rule sets and better models that make skirmish games, and I would patronize them over Games Workshop. Games Workshop does not need my money for me to play skirmish games with them. I'll play Marvel Crisis Protocol, or I'll play I mean, I won't play Infinity, but I'll offer Infinity as a reason. I'll play Will Hungerford's new game that I forgot the name of, which came out was previewed at Adepticon. Shit. I don't know. I'll play one of 1,000 different games over Kill Team. Without Interact and everyone bringing high AP damage into Armor of Contempt and Tyranids, how viable is Horde spam? I think it's not good. Like, you're still gonna get randomly killed by Blast. I mean, I think there's just, like we just talked about with Orcs, there's just so many things against, like, that are arrayed against Horde lists that it's going to be bad. And especially if people pick up Astra Militarum and start like giving them a go. I have a sneaking suspicion that Astra Militarum armies running like 9 mortar teams that just sit in the back and auto wound you on 6s is not going to be bad. And if you're like herp derping into, you know, Gantt Carpet or something and you hit 9 mortar teams, you're going to have a bad time. Ugh. Content Superu just picked up MCP, and it's super cool. Here you can throw terrain at people. Yeah, dude, it's sick. Yeah, terrain's weird in that game because the ranges are so compressed that it doesn't function as a defensive mechanic. It's ammunition for your attacks. It's so wild. That's one thing I really appreciate with MCP is how differently they've approached it over other miniature games, because miniatures games for the longest time, because people used to build terrain that was built into their table, they had a paralyzing fear of being able to interact with terrain. And that's not only like GW games, you know, War Machine has had the same thing. You know, every game has effectively had the same thing. And MCP was the first game to be like, stop it. We know y'all have a mat, and you put some terrain on top of it. Just blow that shit up. And I appreciate that they have such a novel approach to how terrain interacts with the mechanics of the game. I think that's really cool. I don't think MCP is a perfect game, but I think it's certainly unique for sure. Vought, Carnifexes and Behemoths call you non-purist with 10-point Venom Cannons are 100% getting slapped on in every Carnifex before you run Screamers? What? Get out of here. That's not, no, get out. What are you doing? Here's the thing, right? If you're like, I'm going to play 9 Carnifexes and they all have Venom Cannons. This is my opinion. I don't have there's no evidence to back this up. And to be fair, now that indirect fire has been nerfed, it may be less of a thing. But if you're like, here's a billion Carnifexes, I'll have heavy Venom Cannons, and my game plan is to move up the table and shoot you and then charge you. Your opponent's going to be like, what if I hide behind a wall? And you're going to be like, you got me. That's it. That's all I had was shooting you with a gun. But a Screamer killer is going to scream and then kill them. That's my opinion. I think that the Tyranid lists that are all about like direct fire shooting and that's all they do, I don't think that those lists are going to be very good because those lists have never been good. Even Tau is like, I do 1 billion damage within the shooting phase. And I'm like, yeah, but half of that is indirect fire and the other half is like breachers and units that deep strike and stuff. MCP still gets cover, but it's based on size versus hero size. Well, yeah, the cover mechanic in MCP, though, is, like, functionally useless, though. I think I see cover... I see a character gain cover in MCP, like, once every 3 or 4 games. There's so many... Like, it's so difficult to take advantage of that it never matters. Concept list. Battalion detachment that fields a horde by splitting units to make them more durable against blast. So, like, it's just well, the purpose of horde lists are to take large units, so your opponent has a tough time removing you from objectives. If you take a bunch of small units, they'll just kill the units that are on the objectives. And so that you can concentrate your defensive buffs. So, like, if you have 30 models and you have a thing that gives them a 5+ invulnerable save, giving that 5+ invulnerable save to 30 models is much better than giving it to 1 out of 3 units of 10 models, right? I mean, multiple small unit style armies are very good, but they're kind of conceptually different than a horde, like a true horde army, where you're like, I'm taking like 8 units of 30 guys, and we're going to run up the table. So I think Armor of Contempt makes transports worth taking. I guess in what faction? Like in Space Marines? I don't know. I think that you take Rhinos and Grey Knights already, and I think you'd still do that. I do think that, I mean, it might be worth revisiting stuff like Land Raiders. 3+ save transports, I'm not sure. Maybe. I definitely think it's worth consideration, and I think there are some factions that are definitely going to do it. The factions that are still sort of reliant on jump pack infantry probably won't take it. So, like, basic Space Marines, I don't know. Like Blood Angels, White Scars, that kind of stuff. Although White Scars will probably still take the Lightning Disembarkation Devastator Squad combo. But the factions that are more ground pounding, I think you'd certainly consider transports for sure. Anyway. Whoa. We've done a lot of talking today, chat. This has been a good discussion, I think. I'm probably gonna pop off momentarily here, everybody. So if anyone has any last thoughts they want to throw in chat, go ahead and throw them in there. Can't girls with war crimes? Will Tau Hammerheads be good against Tyranids now? I think they're worse, actually. No, they're significantly worse than they were. I mean, are Tau Hammerhead... are, like, Hammerhead railguns good full stop? Yeah. But Tyranids have so many transhuman effects now, and their monster transhuman is 1 CP, that there's a non-zero chance the Hammerhead just whiffs and you don't kill anybody with it. And it's a significant chance when you consider, you know, the rerolls that they have access to. So I think Hammerhead railguns are fine, but I don't like if you're looking for a silver bullet answer to Tyranids, I don't know if I would be looking at Hammerheads, especially since their Hammerhead and indirect fire got nerfed like into the dirt. Unfortunately, this little smart missile system's hitting on 5s. Not so great. Oof. Oof. Should you take 1 Exocrine and 1 Acid Spray faction in Behemoth Nizilla? I'm not sold on the Acid Spray. I think that its output is a little low for what it's trying to do. I think Haruspexes might be a sleeper, though. And I talked about it in my video last week about the GT Tyranid lists. Both top 5 lists ran Haruspexes. And I think if you're trying to build a list around high toughness value units that are just blitzing at your opponent, a Haruspex is, I mean, it's a distraction Haruspex. He's like this big, dumb idiot who's either, well, I guess I was going to say it has a zone thrope imperative, but don't do that in a tournament yet, chat. Wait until it gets eroded. But who probably has Dermic Symbiosis, so he's a 4+ invulnerable save. He gets Transhuman for 1 CP, and he kills anything he touches if he hits it, because he's +1 strength of the charge, +1 to wound from the psychic power, and so your opponent has to deal with this big idiot who's just running at them, and then if they don't kill them, then 6 Screamer killers kill them or whatever. So if you're looking for a big dumb dude who fights in the middle of the table, I think a Haruspex is probably the way to go. I'm willing to be proven wrong on the Acid Spray Tyran effects, but I would be looking at Kronos if I'm looking at playing Acid Sprays. I think the additional range from Kronos and the additional AP is a really big deal. Aaron Pursuits? Yeah, dude. Thanks for chilling out and hanging. We're here every Tuesday for those who haven't caught a Tactical Tuesday before. We get very tactical on these Tuesdays. What do I think of Centurion Devastator squads in cover with Imperial Fist bolstered position? I think I'm more interested in... I think you have a tough time sort of holding ground with them. I think I'm probably more interested in Centurion Devastators as as less of a Death Star, more of a one-off maybe. So if you have like a unit of them with with big guns or whatever, and they can sit in the back and support the remainder of the army while being basically impossible to kill, I think I'm a little bit more scared of that than I am like trying to Death Star them out and putting every ability on them. If they're 2+ save, ignoring 1 point of AP in cover, that's probably enough that your opponent doesn't truck with those guys. And I don't know if you need to go much harder than that. Because, at some point, those units are going to have to leave cover, and then your bolster position breaks, and you get sad. Because you're going to have to go to objectives and stuff, right? Do I think World Eaters got buffed or nerfed with these changes? They're tankier, but their chain axe is going to be effectively AP0. I'm gonna be honest. I haven't even looked at at World Eaters in a long time. Are people playing World Eaters right now? I don't think that they are. I would just play Emperor's Children and call it a day until the World Eaters Codex comes out, which everyone is expecting. Yeah, I have no idea. There's so many Chaos sub-factions that are that operate so differently than the game, like the current version of the game, that it's hard to consider whether or not that they're in line. I guess on the whole, I don't know. It's because the Armor of Contempt works against every faction, but it works against every faction, but it only works for half the factions in the game. I guess it's a net buff. That's what I'll say about that. World Eaters buffed. They're the best faction in the game now. Let's frickin' do it. Grey Knight Paladins making a comeback? I don't know about Paladins, because Paladins are weird and kind of poorly thought out. But I'm gonna be honest. I think Grey Knight Terminators probably make a comeback. Vaunt actually big on Haruspexes. They have answer for whatever you throw, and if you throw stuff at it, it just eats it and heals. Yeah, for sure. I have to play some Haruspexes, chat, because I haven't played. Have I ever played a Haruspex? I probably have at some point. I'm sure someone can pull up a VOD of me playing a Haruspex, but not enough, I guess. I wrote them off a little bit with the new codex, but they have a very flexible profile. They're a little slow, but like that's probably fine if the goal is to make your opponent just attack it. And your opponent, like, they can't feed it anything that it isn't good at killing because its profile is so flexible. It's not like a Toxic Green where you like put a Dreadnought in front of a Toxic Green. It's like, I don't know what to do about that. But a Haruspex is like, yeah, D3 plus 3 damage, bitch, and just eats it. So I bet they're good. I bet Haruspexes are good. Maybe not in the mirror though. They're gonna get mortal wounded into the oblivion. James Loader, yeah, just using him as backline support, not as a Death Star. Yeah, I think that's good. I think that it's worth revisiting a lot of Space Marine stuff, especially stuff with high armor saves. I keep like, is there a Land Raider variant that we can pick out that's like actually solid? They're also expensive. How many points is like a las cannon Devastator squad? I guess the issue with Devastators is that you have a tough time. So like Centurion Devastators themselves with heavy bolters. Oh no, they're just 80 points a piece. Is that right? So there's 70 base. Oh, that's so many points. There's 70 base, and they can take 2 of any other weapon. So they could go to 85 for double heavy bolters, or 95 for double las cannons. So they're 210 with no upgrades. Ignoring the benefits of cover is actually pretty impactful right now because their guns are relatively high AP, which means that they can actually punch through Armor of Contempt plus cover, which is like the wombo combo now. I think the problem with the Centurion Devastators is that they compete directly with regular Devastators, which are like for similar or less points have like dramatically higher output and the core keyword. So it's kind of tough, is what I'll say about that. But what all can we look at that has 2+ armor save? Let's look at all these weird Land Raiders, right? Is there a Land Raider in here who's like actually magically really good? Achilles was always sweet because it used to have a 4+, but now it has a 5+. At least it's not 18 wounds anymore. And it can take twin multi-meltas. Like, this thing is pretty sick, although it's 340 points, so that's pretty expensive. That one's also good because it has it's a 2+ armor, so it's effectively 1+ armor, 5+ invuln. So you have to get to AP. You have to get to AP 3 to put it to a 3+ armor. So even against, I guess the invuln kind of doesn't matter at that point. So you're paying extra points for it. Because even against AP 5, right, it goes to 2, 3, 4, 5 up, 6 up. So you have to get to AP 5 for the invuln to matter. But even against AP 4, it's saving on 4s, right? That's wild. Or 5s. AP 3, it's saving on 4s. How about old school Land Raider? For 235 points, it's 2 twin las cannons. Because like, so the reason I'm sort of considering here, chat, is if we're talking about a 200-point unit that doesn't have the core keyword, we almost might as well be looking at vehicles, and the vehicles also have additional utility as well. Although they don't get cover, obviously, which is a big deal. So in the comparison, like this one gets 4 lance cannons, but those guys get 3 grav cannons, which is like probably pretty similar in terms of output for 15 more points. So I think I like a unit of Grav Cannon Devastators for 210. I'll buy it. I guess it's also kind of cool that the super heavies get get Armor of Contempt despite the fact it's not a sub-faction ability. So even though they're in an auxiliary detachment generally, they'll still get it. So I think your super heavy tanks are going to be that much more effective. Very cool. Yeah, I don't know if I would play Las Cannons, chat. There's like so many transhuman effects going around. You want like the high volume. Yeah, Iron Hands make all the vehicles super good, for sure. I want to. Maybe I'll play an Astraeus, chat. I love Astraeus so much. I think they're the coolest freaking thing. Somebody play an Iron Hands Astraeus and win a GT with it real quick. Is there like? It's probably pretty okay against Tyranids, right? Does a billion damage. You don't really care about transhuman monsters because everything wins on 4s anyway. And it just has like 16 attacks, right? It could be 2 plasma. It's either 4 las cannons and the accelerator, or 2 plasma and the accelerator. So 2d6, 3 damage versus. And if everything's transhuman, you're wounding on 4s anyway, so you don't care about the being strength 8. I guess if they go first and then Malice it for you, it's kind of sucks, but it is what it is. Sicarians don't have a 2+, right? Oh shit, they do. Oh no. What? Oh man. Is this the resurgence of Sicarians? Are we gonna see Sicarians come back? 14 wins the 2+ armor and damage reduction, and AP reduction. Makes this little boy pretty sick. But that's different than like a gladiator, right? Because yeah, all the repulsor variants are higher toughness but lower armor save, and we care about the armor save in this case. I think the Omega was the highest output for points. So it's a 6-shot strength 9 AP 3 damage gun versus the battle tank is strength 7 AP 2, right? Yeah, for the same thing. So for 10 more points, you get the upgraded gun. That's a hell of an upgrade for 10 points. Sicarian Omega seems good. I don't hate these guys, chat. Yeah, I'm kind of... I might be in on Sicarians. Entering the Sicarian meta. I guess Vindicators, too. Vindicators also 2+ save. Oh, no, they're 3+. Are they? Oh, maybe this one's 3+ because it doesn't have the shield in front. Is the regular Vindicator 2+? I thought it was. Yeah, because you can take a seed shield. Okay, yeah. It's weird that this is add 1 to a saving throw rather than increase the save characteristic. Their output's so shitty though, right? D6 shots for D6 damage. Ugh. I wish there was like a better gun you could take on these things. Rather than the shitty Demolisher cannon. I'm so close on these Vindicators, chat. I'm so close. And there's like, there's no cool interactions, right? We can't like give them like a weird sub-faction benefit to make spamming 3 of them really good. Are Hunters also 2+, or are they a 3+, or a 3+ T8? Let's go here. They're a 3+ T8, sad. So you can also, if we're pushing vehicles, you can also take Stealthy or Raven Guard, just generic Raven Guard. You can put all your vehicles to a 1+ save as well, from greater than 18 inches. I wish they had more stuff that benefited vehicles. I think they got rid of the I think they got rid of like the combined shot strats, chat, because they used to, they used to have the old like line breaker bombardment. Yeah, that's gone. It was really janky. Like all those ways to orbital strike people and weird, if you took multiples of a single unit. Yeah, that was pretty weird. Just add a Stormbolter. Easy. We've done it, chat. Vindicators damage output fix. 1 Demolisher Siege Cannon plus 1 Stormbolter. Yeah, I don't know. Those 2+ save guys are pretty sweet. But the Devastator Centurions definitely in the comparison don't look too bad. Just a 1+ armor save on any of that stuff is pretty solid. Why not just take all of it? There you go. Easy peasy. So yeah, I'd definitely consider the Devastator Centurions for sure. And I bet that there's a combo in there to make those vehicles pretty effective. And it may just be playing Iron Hands, like generically, like hand wave around playing Iron Hands. You could play Iron Hands with the Devastator Centurions. Ta-da! There you go. All right, chats. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close out the discussion there. But thanks, everyone, for coming and hanging out with me. I think this is a pretty good one. Was pretty happy with the last outing of Harry Dan. We did win last weekend, so I was a little sad to have his actual last outing not be a tournament win. But we got close. Unfortunately, bad matchup in the finals there against Harlequins. It's a very difficult one for poor old Harry Dan. But he can chill on the shelf for a while and watch the rest of the Codex have a chance in their time in the sun. So I don't know. Hopefully he gets an update and we'll see. He just needs to be cheaper, I think, in the new Codex, and he'd probably be playable. So anyway, thanks everyone for hanging out with me. Thanks everyone for watching. And remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.